See if we can get the... Hey, Eric, do you mind moving the mouse to the other screen? Thank you so much. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Religious Inclusive Excellence Symposium, and shout out to everyone on Zoom. I want to just, before we get started here, thank our sponsors again, but also our committee and a couple of others. And so the Religious Inclusive Excellence Symposium, again, a continuation of our Inclusive Excellence Symposium that happened just a couple months ago. The Office of the President, our own division, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Office of Global Engagement, USU Student Association, the University Libraries, Emma Eccles College of Education and Human Services, Division of Student Affairs, Department of Psychology, Department of Religious Studies, Department of Sociology, Social Work and Anthropology, University Marketing and Communications, the Center for Intersectional Gender Studies and Research, and USU USA Graduate Senator. Let's give them a round of applause. And I also want to give a shout out to the committee, which was composed of Patrick Mason, who you heard from yesterday, Harrison Kleiner, the Associate Vice Provost. Patrick is the Professor of Religious Studies and the Arrington Chair. Professor Norm Jones, Emeritus Professor of History at USU. Richard West, who's also the Cash Community Connections. He'll be up as well today. Bonnie Glass-Coffin, Kathy Chudaba, Beth, and myself. Let's give all them a round of applause. All right. The other folks who I want to be sure to thank are our own event services team, who's scattered all around. Let's give them a round of applause as well. The other folks to thank are Aggie Blue Light Media. Give them a round of applause. And also our business services team. Give them a round of applause as well. And I also want to thank Dr. Arungu, the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, for when I first landed here. There's a couple different projects around campus, and we had heard sort of different contexts where religion would come up and different things, and I had also kind of went back and forth and said, hey, what would your thoughts be on an event and things of that nature. So just for having the confidence in me, the mentorship and support, well, I want to thank her for that. But yeah, let's go ahead and give her a round of applause as well. So the big thing, if you were here yesterday, thank you. The big thing that I wanted to just remind everyone is with the Inclusive Excellence Symposium, our main goal was to help people identify, recognize, and define inclusive excellence and its practices across USU systems, but also here in the community. With the Religious Inclusive Excellence Symposium, the big focus is focusing on how identity shapes our understanding of equity, social justice, and so forth. And so that's one thing that I just want to bring to everyone's attention. The other thing is yesterday you may have noticed there's a lot of scholars, a lot of scholarly background. I wanted to really build foundations, focusing on terms and definitions, making sure we're using the words in a common way, but also so you could kind of get a preview of a lot of different angles from a more of a scholarly perspective. But today, a lot of the presenters, they are scholars as well, but you'll notice that they're really immersed in different practitioner aspects, whether they're ministers here in the Valley, or maybe they do prevention work for the Office of Equity, maybe they're doing policy analysis in one of our divisions. You'll see several people across campus where they're professors, but they're going to give you more of an angle of what it's like to maybe live out some of these traditions. And so with that, I just want to remind everyone, our goal, again, with this symposium isn't to place you in a tradition, to shake you out of a tradition. It's really to be able to reflect on how does our identity shape how we see everything. So that's something just to think about. When it's more in a practitioner angle, people are going to speak of it at a more personal level. But with that, just always recognizing, again, it's not necessarily to promote a different tradition. It's really just to kind of give a perspective of how that identity is shaping how they go about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, I don't want to waste too much time here. When we're looking at the word diversity, just remembering that what we mean by that is to value, engage with all dimensions of human experience, including but not limited to racial and ethnic background, nationality, sex, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, veteran status, here's what we're doing today, religious and ethical value systems, disability, age, political positions, and socioeconomic status. Now, what you'll notice about religious and ethical value systems is they have a prominence in a way that maybe some of the other terms don't, in that they shape how you see all of those other terms. Does that make sense? And so that's really why we want to flesh it out. Also, some people have asked, why not use the word interfaith? Well, it's because we want to help define, well, what does that mean when we use the word religion in our policies and in our practices? So, with that, I would like to turn the time over to the Reverend Jason Samuel, Vicar of St. John's Episcopal Church, who's going to focus on religious inclusive excellence in the church and in the community. Let's give him a round of applause.
Hi, Isaiah. Good morning. And you get to start with the Episcopalian at first in the morning. Again, my name is Jason Samuel, and I'm the vicar or the priest at St. John's Episcopal Church here in Logan. And some of you may know we just finishing up celebrating our 150th anniversary. That we've been as an active part of the presence of the community and the religious faith communities here in Cache Valley. So it's a pleasure to be with you here. And of course, coming to speak to you a little bit today, coming from the perspective of a clergy member in a local congregation, and also about how that relationship may be involved with a university or not, and also about how we often will work or sometimes not work in religious diversity and in equity and inclusion and all the aspects of what we should embrace in social justice. So we know all churches, they all have that unique place because depending on your tradition, your background, your religious affiliation or denomination, you may have certain things that you know that you have to honor and be true to what your core beliefs and your core values are. And so that always sets in a different tone that a little bit in which you see in the university setting where there is not a sense of, if you're a part of a particular religious community, you usually conform to some of the basic values of that, or you usually hopefully choose to. But to do that is, unfortunately, what we have seen in the past, and I think is part of a problem in modern-day American Christianity, is a lot of our churches have just kind of sidestepped from it altogether. They've just kind of released any responsibility for the aspects of true social justice and equity and understanding and building, and instead tend to circle the wagon, so to speak, in a lot of our churches and kind of be defensive of maintaining the institution instead of necessarily always the values of our faith. And we at St. John's, this has been a part of our tradition since we've been here in Cache Valley, has had a history of involvement in the aspects of the broader community, of serving the community that is considered core to our central belief in following Jesus Christ as Christians. So we believe that is what Jesus calls us to do, and we are called to live into. So some of that started very early on. Some are aware of a man who was named Paul Jones, who came here as a priest in the early 1900s. He actually played as sometimes on the football team here. It wasn't, of course, USU at the time, but he did that. Also sometimes was a referee. I guess because he was clergy, they figured they could trust him. So he did those things, but very active within the collegiate community here of offering a place for college students to come and to learn and to have safe places to just speak and share things in their life and their faith. They also worked towards things of social justice and equity. He supported women's suffrage for the right for women to vote. He worked very strongly, he and the church, with the city here, that when utilities began to be installed in our city, to work towards equity in the sense that the parts of the city that had less affluence and financial and social economic diversity were receiving the same services at the same time, so that people were getting electricity, water, and sewer as they came available, that it was not just for those who could afford it the most. There were many activities and things that were brought to the community, and things for young men and for young women, and a lot of these various opportunities that opened up, opening the first kind of public library and a place for people to do that in the area, as well as a school to promote education for all people, no matter what their religious background or faith may be. Their children were all welcome to come to this school. Eventually, of course, they turned that over to the state of Utah when they took over and did those things in public education. However, many places we find in churches have just turned those things over and then kind of wondered, well, what do we do next? And part of that is what we do right now. And part of what St. John's, and part of what is also the broad part of the understanding in the Episcopal Church. And the Episcopal Church is part of the worldwide Anglican communion around the world of Anglican or Episcopal Christians, which there's about 85 million around the world. Not quite that many in the United States or in Utah. But there is a principle that's always been very close to our heart of believing that living into our faith, our understanding of Jesus, the scriptures, the sacraments, all of that is in our service to others and how we treat one another. One of the key things that we do from time to time in our church is we renew what we call our baptismal covenant. And when we do so, the very last question that's asked of you is, will you respect the dignity of every human being, and will you love your neighbor as yourself? And your response is to be, I will with God's help. And we mean that. These are not just all nice words. They're meant to be something that is to change and to be part of our lives. So we believe we are called to go out and to serve and to build relationships. Now, I know sometimes people are a little leery, and some traditions don't necessarily like to get involved in as many ecumenical or even interfaith activities. But one of the things here we've also benefited in Cache Valley is that we do have a pretty active interfaith community in which we work towards that understanding, in which I participate, will support, and also how that also benefits the broader community, including USU, and the ability to help and build understanding, to build bridges among students, faculty, and within the local communities, or maybe the communities in which students may live their faith out, to where they're able to ask the proper questions and build and grow in this sense of their understanding of diversity, and not feeling that as a threat, but as something to excel in and to embrace without fear. So we have, like we just recently had our interfaith Thanksgiving service. It was held at St. Thomas Aquinas Roman Catholic Church, and had people from all faiths, Christian faiths, from Baha'i, for Jewish, Islam, for all of us to come together to say we come together for a common good and respect, and to give thanks and gratitude for things that we have and how we're then to remember in serving others in our community. One of the things that also in the sense of local that's connected to St. John's, but also is very much a part of our community, and I know we have Richard West here who's going to do a fantastic job of telling you about the Cache Community Connections, but I serve on that board, and that started out of 9/11, and when the need for religious communities and the community, civic and all, to come together to say, how do we avoid the things that we see this in the division and hate and fear that can come out of this, and how can we work together to do that? There is no sense where anyone is asked to compromise their faith or their own basic religious values, but we're called to come together for a common good, which is, we believe, the call of all the basis of our faiths and religions. So I'm excited that we have the Cash Community Connections in this community, that also persons like myself and also civic leaders or nonprofits and others come together to build a mutuality and respect. So I believe that's very, very important. Now, lastly, I will say for myself, and as an Episcopalian, I will say that towards religious, diversity, inclusion, and equity, one of the things that we are supported by is the Episcopal Church itself in the United States has taken on some strong policies about that. Now, what we do know is when we involve in this work, and to the great things like happening here today about with this type of inclusion and to include the religious communities and how we do that, is sometimes it comes with a cost. And it comes with a cost of sometimes people don't like it. And I know for us in the Episcopal Church, a lot of that started for us in the 1970s when we made conscious decisions to say, we won't just say, well, of course everybody's welcome, or whatever that means, because maybe we don't know what that means, and what do people know? What are they going to experience when they are there? So there were things in which we took upon who is accessible to ordination, who is accessible to all the full sacraments of the church, asking these base questions of saying, do we live into what we believe Jesus taught us to do? And so we made explicit what that meant. So at this point in our particular church, which we try to strive in excellence towards, is like access to ordination. Who you are, just who you are as a child of God, created in God's image, is good, sufficient, and perfect. You do not have to become something else that you're not. So we believe everyone should have access. It doesn't mean everyone should be ordained. There's a discernment process that we go through. But it means that it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, or if you are single, what your race, what your gender, what your sexual orientation may be. It does not matter. It's more about how then do you live into who you are. What is how you live your life? We also took on the aspects of that in the sense of, well, who is welcome to live into the full life of the church? And we made those same type of commitments across the board, that whether it's for laity, clergy, that we be consistent about that welcome and inclusion. Now, when you do that, some people, for some reason, feel threatened that maybe someone might get something that they're going to be not have anymore. And they leave. And we had an exodus from the national church over those years. But what has happened, and here's what is one of the great costs, in the sense of cost, but the rewards of committing to this work that you all are hearing today, participating in, is that it begins to change your communities and transform them in a very healthy way. What we saw was going from a church with a lot of nominal membership, who a lot of them came because of social obligations and thought it was the right thing. It began to change to where people were saying, I'm coming more out of my conviction because this is the right thing to do and to believe, instead of, well, it just seems like the nice thing. What we have had is an influx of, in some places, in churches that are experiencing growth, and this has been looked at and studied across in the Episcopal Church, that a lot of local congregations, and done in studies in diocesan levels, which is a geographical area within a state, of looking at churches that will grow or thrive, are often ones who've committed and say, just clearly, this is who we are, and this is who we all invite to conclude to be a part of this and to make us even more of a healthy community. And when we do so, we've seen growth over time. It's not usually overnight, but people begin to find out as they share and they learn. They begin to see that the people have the same integrity about how they're living their faith as they say about their beliefs. And that seems to ring true, especially among most of our current younger generations, and your generation, is that they want to see is their integrity, not perfection. Do you have the ability to say, we make mistakes, but we are working to be better and to grow and to be ones who, if we are Christians, to follow that faith with some integrity, to follow the teachings. And for us, and what I feel, at least there's a sense of also strengthening for me as a leader within our church, is I am supported by our broader church in the understanding that we do not need to fear our differences, and that those who even disagree with me wholeheartedly, that I don't have to be threatened, and that we can love and respect one another. In that same understanding, realizing that sometimes our faith traditions may lead us in different directions, but that we can still honor one another, and that brings about, hopefully, a sense of strengthening our bonds of mutuality and work. We know that on campuses, you have people from all different walks of life and diversity here that sometimes you won't see in the broader community here in Utah. But that is wonderful, and it has brought about also some of the things in religion that is often used to divide can bring people into to unite. I've had the honor of being invited to some various groups to come and speak on campus for the Interfaith Student Alliance and to speak with the Queer Student Alliance and those about dealing with issues of faith and human sexuality and talking about those issues that brought about safe places to talk and also find out you can respect each other even if there's a sense of difference within maybe how you approach these things. So I think there's some incredible benefits to this as you continue and especially embrace them on college campuses. Now, again, some of the benefits of this work that we do is also, like I mentioned, there's the CCC, but there's also various support groups that spring up in our communities. Next door to St. John's, we have Logan Pride, and we're able to sometimes help and support and work with them. We have the Warming Center, some of you know, that has began last winter and is going to be beginning December 4th, where we'll have all the way until April 1st, where 7 days a week, people can come and get out of the cold, and that we provide a place working with and offering the space to the Warming Center leadership to offer that, where they are a nonprofit that is not religious affiliated. We obviously are. But what we're doing is finding the common goals to how do we serve the common good, which also for us and for me leads me to the very basic core values of Christian faith. If we're doing so, you also don't have to be the only ones who do it. Partnership, working together is so crucial to getting things done. We talk about the issues of homelessness, but it's when we come together, yes, including faith communities and those who differ, as well as civic and others, to come and work together, that we can build more of a consensus and also rally our resources together to help change things for our community. Now, we might lastly just ask, what do we do in local congregations for this diversity, equity, and inclusion to support the work of university leaders and the faculty and students in their quest for this work and understanding on campus? And firstly, it can be is we have the pleasure of having university students that come to St. John's. And for those who just also come to visit, one of the things I actually look for there is a class here. I'm going to get in trouble. I don't know the name of the class, but it's one of the basic religion, intro to religion, I think, courses, in which we get people who, they encourage them to go out and to experience places of different traditions. And so on some Sundays or a Wednesday, we may have some students come in, and you can tell they're not used to that background, and they look like the deer with the headlights, and we just try to make them feel very welcome and comfortable, and to say, just be who you are, and just come. And there's the opportunity to, where like this, it's an opportunity to be supportive to these students, that they're stepping out into new territory, to offer them a welcome hopefully that is sincere and genuine. Of course, there's the opportunities to support both leadership, faculty, and the students by various activities that happens on campus, and when we may get invited to participate in helping and facilitate questions, facilitate discussions where people can ask certain things. The one that I participated in before was good because we had people from various religious traditions speak about our experience of those who have maybe gone through traumatic and some non-traumatic experiences as they have come to a fuller understanding of themselves, sometimes in their gender or their identity or sexuality, and how they live that within their faith and do that honestly. So that allows us to offer some support as well. Our hope is that we can continue to work with the universities, with college campuses, and that we can see our churches get even bolder in their support of this inclusivity. That, again, when it comes down to it, our Christian faith, at least for us Christians, should be based on love, not fear. And if we have this sense of confidence in our own belief in who we are, whatever church it may be, that we then feel that we're not threatened then by the dialogue, by the openness to enter into that ongoing conversation, mutuality, to bring a sense of equity that does not compromise your faith, but what it does is hopefully strengthen it to the understandings that we remember that we are to respect the dignity of all persons, and inevitably to love one another and love our neighbors as we are to love ourselves. So I'm very grateful for any opportunities to do so and to continue to enter into both group as well as private discussion, especially with students, which is a wonderful experience and to have. And so I thank you for this time and appreciate you allowing me to share a little bit with you this morning. Thank you.
So just remember, those are in Zoom. We'll put a link in there so you can also submit any questions that you would like to submit to any of the speakers for day 1 or day 2. Yesterday we really focused on question 1 on how identity shapes your views of equity. But today I really want the sort of underlying question to be, how does your identity also shape your experience and journey as an administrator, a student, faculty, staff, or community members? That's kind of the big question for today. One thing that I like to do with this is to also show where this work is embedded within USU systems. And so now I would like to invite Crystal to the stage to talk about our role in sincerely held religious beliefs and a sense of belonging at USU. Let's give her a round of applause.
Good morning. I'm very humbled to be here today to share my experience and thoughts. My name is Crystal Giordano, she, hers pronouns, and I am an assistant vice president here at USU. And I plan to spend the next couple of minutes sharing how each of us play a role in creating a sense of belonging for our students, fellow staff, and colleagues, and how religious beliefs intersect with that. But if we back up, zoom out, and take a 30,000-foot view of why this symposium and topics like belonging and religious beliefs are so important, it's because as an institution, we have committed to fostering inclusive excellence through various goals. My intent for this presentation is to show you how we all have a role to play in accomplishing these 2 specific goals that we've listed on our roadmap to inclusive excellence. The journey to inclusive excellence, to quote a Harry Potter movie, is going to be a bumpy ride. It's going to take all of us. It's not a job we can leave to the folks in DEI, as great as they are. We all have a role to play. So now, let's go the opposite direction and zoom in and reflect inwards. I encourage you to think, how can I personally, in my role here at USU, contribute to these goals? Do I hold sincerely held religious beliefs? And how do they inform my role at USU and how I interact with our Aggie community? What impact do I personally have on belonging? Belonging for students, for my colleagues? As you hold these questions in your mind, let me quickly share my own sense of self and positionality. It's a cute picture, huh? Yeah, it's not me, but but I thought it was super cute. I grew up the oldest sibling of 4, all brothers. All the stereotypes that you can rally about being the oldest, they all hold true for me. As a military family, relocating a lot, my brothers were my built-in support network, my friends. My parents converted to the LDS Church after graduating from USU, which meant that even though we moved a lot, we also had a religion or a faith to belong to and welcome us. We had youth activities, summer camps, Christmas dinners, and a ward to share sacred traditions with. So even though my parents converted to the LDS Church later in life, I am a descendant of Mormon pioneers. It is part of my heritage. But growing up, I recognized very early how different I looked from those around me. Barbie didn't look like me. The Disney princesses certainly didn't look like me at this time. Even my Cabbage Patch dolls looked different. Growing up, I was asked if I was adopted, where I was from. So I spent most of my childhood desperately finding ways to try to blend in or, fit the norm. And by the time I was a young adult, I rejected many definitions of the norm, the tradition, and the LDS religious faith. I consider myself to be spiritual but agnostic. Yet I still longed for a place to belong, but somewhere that welcomed all of me and anyone else without question. So fast forward to my professional career in higher education, and this desire led me to roles in admissions, student leadership, registrars, scholarships, and now working with commencement and as a policy officer. As Dr. Gupta mentioned yesterday, we bring our religion or spirituality, our whole selves with us into every situation. So this is why I share a little snippet of myself in my story. Now, I'm bringing all of that backstory with me to my professional roles, right? And I'm watching how deeply intertwined religious beliefs are with sense of belonging. It's all around us. Some of the examples that I'll share will illustrate impact on the interpersonal level, and some examples illustrate impact on a systematic level. All are important, and I hope to illustrate that no act is too small or too minor. We all have a role to play. One of my most professionally satisfying roles has been a connections instructor for first-year students. I love the excitement and energy that they bring with them and their willingness to forge new friendships. But even as first-year connection students explore downtown with classmates, what conversations come up just as we view the Logan downtown scene? Or when they talk about what they like to do for fun? Belonging begins with these very first connections. Observing these students, I'm so intrigued by belonging that I decide to research and study belonging as part of my dissertation. A quick Google search of the definition of belonging is an affinity for a place or situation. We typically feel affinity when we feel we can contribute to something we care deeply about, when we are valued for our authentic selves. And what erodes belonging? When we feel different, an outsider, or that we're not welcome as we are. Sometimes sincerely held religious beliefs can exclude unintentionally. I'll give you an example. In one of my professional roles, I worked with student leaders to recruit prospective students to the university. The leaders that I had the privilege of working with amazed me and inspired me. But one student story sticks out when I think about religious beliefs and belonging. Leo was a first-generation college student who was not a member of the majority religious faith that many of our student leaders belong to. For this reason, Leo didn't participate in many of the same extracurricular activities and felt radically different from his peers. Although he had accomplished amazing academic feats of his own, despite some difficult odds, he still didn't feel he belonged. Thank goodness, through his own tenacity and the compassion of his peers, he decided to stick it out and was eventually voted to lead the leadership group as co-president his senior year. What makes me so proud of his perseverance is that his senior year, he set an example for another student, Ike, who was also a first-generation student from an underrepresented background. Leo can now give back and clear the path for Ike. Leo is now in a PhD program at USC and will no doubt continue to inspire those around him. I think about Leo and how much he impacted our leadership team. So, in another professional role of mine, I was often called on to recruit out-of-state student athletes as someone who was different from the rest of the recruiters. The question of religion always came up for our out-of-state visitors, and whether or not their student would belong and feel at home at the institution. Even before students step foot into the classroom, they're considering how religious beliefs may impact their student experience. Now, these professional roles, they may seem obvious to identify how my own sincerely held religious beliefs impact my role at the institution, but we each play a vital part in belonging. Let me give you another example. Let's consider event planning or commencement. How do religious beliefs intersect this role? Here's just a small example. The day and time for commencement and graduation ceremonies has shifted around. This year, the schedule included events on Thursday and Friday, stretching into the late evening. Because the event ended after sundown on Friday, it interfered with the Sabbath and religious practices for individuals that honor Saturday as a Sabbath. And for those of Islamic faith, Friday would have been a conflict for them. So by considering an adjustment to the schedule of events and brainstorming creative solutions, we can honor the religious beliefs of our community and not hold graduation events late on Friday evening. Another example related to commencement, sacred beliefs held by indigenous people often extend to the land and those who came before us. Professor Darren Perry yesterday shared with us about the history of the land here in Cache Valley near the Bear River. So acknowledging these beliefs through a land acknowledgement statement at official university events is another example of how we make progress towards inclusive excellence. Okay, let's try another role, the policy officer, which is a new role that many of you may not be aware of yet. So I'll tell you a little bit about what that is. The policy officer collaborates with individuals on campus who are charged with writing or revising university policy. The policy officer does not write policy, enforce policy, or advocate for policy. The policy officer serves as a shepherd to guide policy writers and stewards through the process and offer support. The policy officer, in collaboration with the policy committee, also notifies the campus community when new policy is being proposed or new statutes are being passed. So, for example, a new statute has already been passed in the state of Utah regarding accommodations for students who have scheduling conflicts due to sincerely held religious beliefs. The proposed policy asks faculty members to discern if the student's request can reasonably be accommodated without undue hardship or negatively impacting learning outcomes. The statute requires USU to provide a calendar of religious holidays as a resource. And each institution must designate an individual who students can turn to with questions. While I certainly am not a content expert, in my role, how can I provide support in gathering the content experts to make an informed decision on how to implement this policy? And as a policy officer, I do have the responsibility of having a general working knowledge of the policies that are currently in place, or good friends that will let you know when there's existing policies in place, and how they might intersect. So, we already have a policy for excused absences, and as that policy includes, holy days, religious holidays, are an allowable reason for students to miss class. So how will this overlap with the new statute? And in our faculty policies regarding academic freedom, policy 403, which was quoted yesterday by Dr. Harrison, we do provide an avenue for students to request an alternative assignment when the course content violates their sincerely held religious beliefs. So again, how are we going to connect all of these with the new statute? Okay, well, what if my role is more supportive? Let's say landscaping or facilities. How do I contribute to religious inclusive excellence at USU? I would dare say anyone serving in a supportive role has valuable first-hand knowledge of how students, staff, faculty behave, react, respond, and live on our campus. One example may be a custodial team member that notices the same student utilizing a closet on campus at the same time each day as a quiet place to pray. That demonstrates an unmet need by the student who may not even know to ask if there are other alternatives. You could be the connection for that student to show them someone cares and values their beliefs and practices. Okay, last rule. What if you're a student at USU? As a student myself, specifically as a researcher, I can tell you that sincerely held religious beliefs have impacted my research. My dissertation is on the relationship between sense of belonging, scholarships, and persistence of first-generation college students. In my survey, I asked USU students if they intended to return the next semester. My dissertation chair mentioned, this will be an easy question, just yes or no, right? But I mentioned, no, we have a significant population of students that take a break from their education for religious missions. So we have to accommodate for that. Even with data, religious beliefs informs the context and how we approach the data. Now, as a student, you play a tremendous role in creating sense of belonging for students, particularly those of minoritized faiths or groups. Staying curious, sincere, and empathetic can lead to deep and meaningful relationships and inclusion that expands beyond religion. You have a profound impact on the academic trajectory and success of your peers. We need you too. So in closing, let's return to our self-reflection questions. How can I personally, in my role here at USU, contribute? Do I hold sincerely held religious beliefs? And how do they inform my role at USU and how I interact with our Aggie community? What impact do I personally have on belonging for students and my colleagues? I hope in our brief time I've illustrated how intertwined religious beliefs are with belonging. When students feel they belong, they are actively engaged. They persist. They graduate. When staff and faculty feel seen and heard, they contribute to our wonderful Aggie family in amazing ways. All of these outcomes support the goals USU has committed to in our roadmap to inclusive excellence, and we all play a crucial role in leading USU in that direction. Thank you.
All right, how's everyone doing? Good, good. All right. So just a quick thing about common language. I know I mentioned this yesterday, but it's worth repeating. So when we're using the word justice or social justice throughout the presentations, just remember that it's being defined as multifaceted and multidimensional, encompassing race, gender equity, social class, sexual orientation, and religion, and others as the needs of specific context demands. So it's really looking at a sense of the whole. The next thing that I want to talk about in relating religion and religious inclusive excellence to our systems is religious inclusive excellence through respectful communication. So I want to invite Tanisha from the Office of Equity to guide us through that topic. Let's give her a round of applause.
Hello, friends. I'm going to try to figure out this clicker, too. Like Isaiah said, my name is Tanisha. My pronouns are she, her, and I work in the Office of Equity, so I know I'm a familiar face for many employees at Utah State, but Isaiah asked me to be here to talk about respectful communication as it relates to religious inclusive excellence. And this is something that comes up in my job a lot, and so this is personal as it relates to my work here at Utah State, but I am in this role because I'm very passionate about this. So it might seem personal in a different way than the other folks who have talked today, but this is something that comes up when I talk to folks, when we get reports to our office, because we also respond to discrimination at Utah State, and so this is very personal to me. So I first want to just talk about USU's anti-discrimination policy. If I didn't talk about the policy from the Office of Equity, I'd probably get in trouble, but I'm going to keep this really brief, just to remind folks that part of religious inclusive excellence is we don't want to be discriminating against folks because of their religious beliefs or using religion to discriminate against folks. So discriminatory conduct at Utah State is either harassment or discrimination, and you're always welcome to look up the policy online. I'm not going to read it out loud for you folks, but it's this idea that if we treat someone unwelcomely because of what we call a protected characteristic in the legal world, and I'll define that in a moment, in a way that affects their employment or education here at the Utah State, it's discriminatory. So that might be the harassing, like unwelcome comments, jokes, things like that about a protected characteristic. It also might be treating them differently than other people in a way that they're not okay with. It makes sense to treat people differently based on different identities if they're okay with it, right? We're all different people, and that's important. But the important piece about discrimination is someone's not okay with it, and it's impacting their ability to participate in their employment or education programs here. So when I talk about protected characteristics, again, not going to talk about this too much in depth, religion is a protected characteristic, along with things like age, race, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, veteran status. So these are under law, the protected characteristics, specifically related to discrimination, which comes from federal law. But what I want to focus on is that religion piece. So from the Office of Equity, religious inclusive excellence is really important to our office, because if we're not being inclusive when it comes to religion, we could end up discriminating against someone. That might be intentionally, but from anecdotal knowledge, that can often be unintentionally. And so I want to talk about how we can have some best practices so we don't even get to that point. And just a few examples. I think examples are always helpful, especially if you're not like a legal language person, which I am not. I have learned to be, but I love examples. So that can look like someone making unwanted comments or jokes. And again, I'm going to focus on religion today because that's the purpose of the symposium, about someone's religious religious beliefs. And when I think about religious beliefs, if you're someone like me, sometimes I think about you have to be actively subscribing to a religion, going to church, right, participating in those religious beliefs, but that's not always the case. It could also be because someone doesn't have certain religious beliefs that they're discriminated against. So I want to highlight that for folks as well. It could also be things like personally targeting someone because of a religious belief. Again, that could happen unintentionally. In a classroom, maybe someone saying, oh, you're from this religious background, could you share with us your experience, when someone isn't comfortable or okay doing that, so they feel maybe personally called out. It could be using nicknames or slurs, or asking really specific personal questions about someone's religion. Again, it is so important to talk about religion. We are here talking about religion. This is our second day talking about it. People should be talking about religious beliefs if they want to do so. In our Office of Equity, we're really big on boundaries, and me specifically. If anyone knows me personally, I will talk about boundaries for about 12 hours if someone will let me, but don't worry, we'll stick to 20 minutes today. And then discrimination would be not giving someone certain opportunities because of their religious beliefs. That might even be just like, oh, well, this person's religion says that they can't work on this certain day. I know this isn't a religious holiday, so I'm not going to even invite them to this professional development conference because of their religious belief. But we haven't asked them. We haven't given them the opportunity. We've made an assumption. So I think when it comes down to discrimination, it's really not making assumptions about folks based on religious beliefs. It's about being mindful of people's boundaries when it comes to religion or differences in religious beliefs, and being thoughtful of, am I treating someone differently because of their religion in a way that they aren't okay with? Because part of being inclusive is saying, if a student came to me and said, this is a really special religious holiday for me, I need to not be in class, that's different than saying, I'm not going to give you this assignment because I know your religious beliefs don't agree with it, when that's a lot of assumptions happening there, right? So I want to just highlight that. So again, policy, I always welcome questions after. I can respond to any questions using the QR code that Isaiah has highlighted, but I want to step away from policy. So we just talked about policy, but I want to talk about best practices around communicating about religion in a respectful way. Because the discrimination policy does not interfere with academic freedom, free speech, and neither does respectful communication, right? But there's a spectrum of, maybe I said something disrespectful. That doesn't mean that I violated a policy, but that also doesn't mean that I was inclusive. So policy is ground level. Not discriminating based on policy is ground level what we should be doing. Today, I want to talk about how do we go above and beyond, how do we be respectful in addition to, just checking my time, how do we be respectful in addition to, be inclusive, because no one feels included if we just do the bare minimum. They're like, oh yeah, so you're not calling me names or asking questions I'm not okay with, but I don't feel truly included. I feel like other than, different, like I'm not welcome here. And I think that's what the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is really striving to do, is go above and beyond into belonging. So I always talk about this in every single training I do, impact versus intent. And this is what is the basis of respectful communication. Because none of us can read someone's mind. None of us can read someone's mind. We do not know what they're thinking. We don't know the motivations behind what they're saying or doing. And that also means they can't read our mind either. All people see is our actions. All they see is what we say, what we do. And so what this graphic is showing is, I genuinely believe, personally, that most people have really good intentions. We want to help people succeed. We want to help people belong. We want to teach. We want to be heard. Really good intentions. And then our intentions, we show them through what we say, how we say it, what we do, how we do it. And that's all the other person is seeing. So there's this barrier. And how they perceive our actions is also based on their experiences, who they are. So there's many layers of filtering and perspective between what we mean and how it's perceived. And I always remind folks when we talk about respectful communications, yes, our intentions matter to us. We are not bad people if we mess up, right? We shouldn't be in this shaming space of, I'm terrible, I should never talk to humans again. But to say, I said or did a thing, and maybe it came from the best of places, but that's not what matters to that person. What matters is I made them feel excluded. I made them feel unheard. I made them feel like they didn't belong. So we can still harm people even if we don't mean to. And especially when we're talking about topics as personal as religious beliefs. And that's something I hear a lot of questions about. I mostly work with employees in workplace settings, but I think this applies to any communication that we have, is how can we share who we are and talk about our experiences and be respectful of how that might impact another person. And I know I haven't been able to listen to all of the amazing speakers in these last couple of days, but I know a lot of folks have talked about the impact religion has had on them. And I think that's so key, is when I talk about religion and communication, it's about impact. So this is a really broad slide, but I think something that's really important to think about impact is self-awareness. Because when we're unintentionally saying or doing something that might hurt someone, that might make them feel excluded, a lot of times that unintentionality comes from a lack of self-awareness of ourselves, of them. And so I drafted a few questions that I'm not going to talk about in depth, and they're really big questions. But to get clear on what our religious and spiritual beliefs are and are not, and how they align with other people. So self-awareness isn't just about, how do I feel about this? What are my beliefs? It's also about how do those interact with other people? We don't exist in a silo or a bubble. If we did, I would not have a job because everyone would be like, I can do what I want whenever I want, right? We're interacting with people, and that's amazing. We're all different, and I think that's the power of being human. It is also the messy part of being human. So asking yourself things like, what even are my religious or spiritual beliefs? And that includes, how are they informing the values I hold, my decisions, how I'm interacting with other people? How might that impact change if the person has different beliefs than me? Because it's very easy to respectfully communicate with someone when you have the same religious beliefs. Very easy. The hard part is when they're different. What are the beliefs of the other people I interact with? Are my beliefs held by the majority of the people I interact with? Because that will make it harder for us to notice differences if we don't know about other people's religious and spiritual beliefs. It also is things like, how are my beliefs impacted by those of the people around me? We don't exist in a silo. Our interactions impact other people, and they impact us. It's also, how does the practice of my beliefs impact other people? Does that impact change again if someone disagrees with me? How do I use my beliefs to contribute to a culture of belonging? I think that's such a key question. Religion can create beautiful communities. A lot of religious beliefs have these really amazing intentional values behind them, and how are we using those to create a culture of not, you're different than me, that's fine, I'm okay with it, but you're different than me, and that's part of who you are, and I accept you and include you, not in spite of, but because of that. And how can we do better? This is something I always say, no human is perfect. We can all always do better. So that's something I think people get hung up on of, I'm going to make a mistake, so I'm not even going to try. And that always makes me a little sad. I've made mistakes, I know other people have, and I think if we can recognize that most of us have good intentions, that can also help us create a community where people feel safer and more comfortable making mistakes. Not that like they didn't harm someone, right? I'm not going to try to excuse that, but really giving each other compassion around this. This is from someone, I actually follow her on Instagram. Her name's Blair Amani, and she does a lot of conversations about topics that people view as controversial. And this is a graphic from her Instagram page about practices for respectful communication. So I want to say where I got this from. Her Instagram page is really helpful, Blair Monty again, but I added onto it and adapted a little to be more specific to the conversation today, but wanted to give her a call out for being the inspiration and kind of the space behind that. But the first thing, if we're going to talk about religious and spiritual beliefs, our own, someone else's, ones that we agree with, ones that we disagree with, one that have impact us in positive ways, ones that have impacted us in negative ways, the first thing to do is consider your own perspective and learn how it might be different from someone else's. And again, you can practice with easier topics first, right? So if we don't have we don't have to be the most aware person on the planet, right? I'm just saying, if we haven't intentionally thought about our own beliefs and where we're sitting on the topic, it's going to bring up a lot more challenges and barriers to a respectful conversation, especially if we disagree with the other person. And again, you can practice with easy topics first. Topics that feel less emotional to you, right, is also often an easier topic. And then boundaries. I'm mentioning them in only, right, part 2. Set and respect boundaries. If someone doesn't want to talk about a religious conversation or a religious belief, whether it's their own or someone else's, that is not respecting their boundary, right? We can't have a respectful conversation with someone if they are don't even want to participate, right? And then ask yourself, what is the purpose of the conversation? And Blair Amani talks about this a lot. The purpose of the conversation should never be to change someone's mind. I struggle with that. My job is to train people about here's what you should do to work with other people. And I get that. But a big piece of that is oftentimes when we're talking about our religious beliefs because we believe them so deeply and they're such a big part of us and how we interact with the world, we do want to share those with other people. And we want them to be on the same page. And I get that. But if we're going into a conversation saying, I'm going to change your mind, we're not coming from a place of respect because we're automatically thinking, you're wrong and I'm right. So get clear on the purpose of the conversation. Is it to share part of myself with that person? Is it to listen to them? Is it to understand where they're coming from? Is it to communicate how maybe I've been impacted positively or negatively by a religious belief, or to listen to how they've been doing that? So getting clear on the conversation is important. And then focus on understanding, communication, curiosity, and respect, which means we're asking questions to try to understand. We're not asking questions to disagree. To really say, I'm going to put my beliefs are important. I'm not putting them aside, but I'm really going to try to say, where is this person coming from? And something that can help is to find common ground first, because differences are harder for us. So it's okay to say, hey, let's focus on what we have in common first before moving on to those differences. And then always speak from your own experience. Don't make assumptions about other people. Don't make generalizations about a religion or a person because of their religious beliefs. Don't make generalizations about, oh, I'm a religious belief and everyone who has this religious practice also agrees with me. Again, we're all very different. So speak from your own experience, don't make assumptions, and own your uncertainty. If you know everything in the world, who are you? Tell me. I want to be your BFF. Call me. Anyway, but for real, we don't. And it's okay to say, even about our own religious beliefs or our feelings about it, I'm not sure, I haven't thought about that. We don't always have to have an opinion about something. I struggle with that, again, very opinionated person of people who know me personally, but we don't always have to have an opinion about something. We don't always have to know something to say, I had never heard that before. I want to think about it some more. Or, I have a friend who might know, let me talk to them about it and get back to you. Or let me do some research first. And if you're addressing harm that someone's done, so they've done something and it maybe comes from a religious place or it impacts you because of your religion, talk about it using I statements and focus on impact. This is most effective because people shut down when they hear, you're rude, you're a jerk, I don't like you, you're so insensitive, you don't even get it, right? To instead say, hey, I felt overlooked when this meeting was scheduled on my religious holiday. And I just focus on what happened, right? I'm not subscribing this person doesn't care, right? Because they might not know. And so it's this place of how do I respectfully communicate that? And if we can't do that, that's okay. I'm not trying to tone police here, right? Maybe we have someone else do it. Maybe we sit, we don't have to bring it up right away and think through it, because it's valid to have a lot of strong emotions, especially if it's something that happens all of the time. And then pay attention to how you feel. It's okay to end a conversation or not even participate in the conversation in the first place. If you're someone like me, I struggle identifying my emotions in the moment. It takes me some time to process. You know what your body does when you're angry. Are your fists clenched? Are you talking faster? Do you feel your heart, right? If you feel yourself being really emotional, it's okay to be emotional. That is a good human experience. But if you feel like it's affecting your ability to listen and understand, to say, hey, you know what? I don't think this is a great time for me to have this conversation, or this is something I'm never comfortable talking about, but I respect that you want to have this conversation. I just want you to know that shouldn't be with me, right? So it's always okay to say, I'm done, or don't even want to start. So that is my time. Please send me questions. Very passionate about this. Isn't like, yes, I'm paid to do it, and I'm glad I'm paid to do it, but like I legitimately like talk about this in my free time. So thank you all for your time today.
Thank you, Tanisha. All right. These are the scholarly practitioners, so lots of good advice. So now I want to welcome Kathy Trudaba to the stage to talk about religion, DEI, and the community. Let's give her a round of applause.
It's wonderful to be here and to have you here today. What I would like to do is share a few reflections of ways of the intersection, if you will, between community and faith communities and DEI. And I'm going to do my best not to overlap too much with what Father Jason talked about earlier, what Richard is going to talk about a little bit later, but then again, maybe a little repetition is just fine. In particular, I'll talk about one group. I'll start with Cash Community Connections and fill in perhaps a few of the gaps from what Jason shared, and then talk about some of the other activities that are going on in the community, and then specifically some of the community building activities and diversity supporting opportunities for my own faith community, which is St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church. So first, let's start with Cash Community Connections. As Father Jason said, CCC started in the aftermath of 9/11. On that Tuesday morning, after the attacks, people in Logan, the mayor's office, and faith communities, and the president of the university were very concerned about the safety of the Muslim community, students and faculty who were here. And so there was a groundswell of reaching out to the university, who then reached out to the members of the university community who were Muslim, and making sure that they were in a safe and protected space. Because at that time, no one knew what was going to happen afterwards and what the response of the broader community would be. The next day, on Wednesday, there was a gathering of additional faith community members, the mayors, and representatives from the university, who came together and as a group said, our community is hurting and we're in pain and we need to do something to address and hopefully alleviate some of that pain. So they planned an event for Friday night, just a couple of days after the attacks. The Eccles Theater on Main Street was full. And there were representatives across the faith community, from the Muslim community, from the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, from representatives of St. John's Episcopal and First Presbyterian and other faith communities. And the spirit in the Eccles Theater that evening was magical, with folks really feeling a connection and an affinity for one another, and recognizing that this connectedness was something that could make Cache Valley special. The following week, this same core group of folks got together and said, we can't lose this. This is something we have to build on. And so from that came the birth of Cache Community Connections. It is an interfaith and civic leader and university representatives who get together once a month at St. John's to share what's going on in the community. And the group might talk about activities from either the various civic or faith communities that are going on, so that we can share that information across all of the communities. Maybe the folks are going to be talking about a shared community problem. And so Matt Whitaker from the Cache Food Pantry might come in and talk about increased needs and demands on the food pantry, and sort of brainstorm and figure out what as a community do we need to do to address those, so that we can involve everyone across faith traditions, across our civic organizations. We might be discussing issues of increased suicide and the mental health crisis in our community, and what we can do as leaders in our faith communities and in our civic organizations. So to support that kind of community building across faith traditions and civic organizations in the university, Cache Community Connections supports various activities throughout the year. So again, going back to September, for our Founders Day event, this year we piggybacked on the 150th anniversary of the founding of St. John's in our community, and helped get additional musicians and the choir, getting people together to help recognize the role that St. John's has played in our community, whether it was offering schools or library, or even the first showers that were publicly available to people in the community who might not have had that service in their own homes. Then, as Father Jason mentioned, our Thanksgiving service. This year, our 21st year of bringing together people from faith traditions. And of course, we've got the larger faith traditions with larger congregations that are represented here in the Valley, First Pres and St. John's and the Catholic Church, and of course the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But we also had representatives from smaller faith traditions or smaller groupings here, congregations in the Valley. So the Baha'is and the Friends, the Quakers. So we're bringing in these smaller groups as well as these bigger groups to help all of those who gathered understand the breadth of religious diversity that we do have here in Cache Valley. And through that recognition, understanding, hear how other people express senses of gratitude and expressions of thanksgiving, and recognizing those commonalities, even when there may be, and certainly are, core theological differences that we share, or that we have across the faith communities. In addition, Cash Community Connections sponsors a community Martin Luther King event. Now, the university has done that for years, but it's only been in the last, 10 or 15 years that we've had a community-based event to honor Dr. King's contributions not mentorship, his example that have helped us develop greater appreciation for diversity and the benefits and the need for doing that. Cash Community Connections pulls into diversity in terms of the environment. And so whether that is sponsoring events around the Earth Day celebration and bringing in local high schools, or sponsoring a panel with people from faith communities who share their faith traditions and beliefs about preserving, protecting, enhancing the environment that we all live in. So Cash Community Connections does a lot of these kinds of activities, but then they support other organizations as sort of an umbrella. One of them that is especially near and dear to my heart is the Loaves and Fishes community meal. And so Loaves and Fishes started back in 2010 when Rachel von Niederhausen, who was a member of the Hillcrest First Ward, came to CCC and said, my brother and I want to do a free event for the community on Christmas Day like Angie's does on Thanksgiving. We're used to do on Thanksgiving. Paul Hines, the pastor of First Presbyterian, was there and said, you can use our space. So on that first Christmas Day, 250 volunteers, food galore. The beef had been donated by Miller's, the predecessor to JBS. Santa Claus was there, gifts for children. Well, about 50 people came. Now, you need to give me a little bit of a chuckle or an oh no to sort of feed the energy. Okay, thank you. But Paul, Lisa Simmons, who is here at the university, Amy Anderson, who is now on the city council, Michelle Welsh, me, Richard West, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We all felt that there was a need in the community for people to get together and to appreciate our differences. And so the model for Loaves and Fishes is that on the first and third Saturday of every month, we gather at First Presbyterian. Community members prepare the meal, serve the meal, and clean up afterwards. Most of the food is provided by either the food pantry or a grant from the Bishop's Storehouse, and that's expanded to support from community businesses like Smith's and Lee's and Schreiber Foods and Cafe Ibis and Macy's and so forth. And so it's these community members who cross faith traditions. The volunteers for providing the meal might come from a ward or a stake. They might come from a faith community. They might be the A-team from USU or the basketball team representatives. I always get a crick in my neck when the basketball folks are there. Members of the pre-med group. And a lot of times we'll have 2 or 3 smaller groups that come together. And they are using this as a chance to talk and get to know each other and build connections across faith or civic or other kinds of volunteer organizations and working together to prepare this meal and serve it. And the best part is sitting down at the table. We might have people there who you might guess this is going to be their hot meal for the weekend. There are other people who come for the socializing. We have a lot of senior citizens who come, disabled adults who come, others in the community. And we like to say that in addition to feeding bellies, we're feeding hearts. And so it's talking to those folks, seeing them come to a meal hunched over by themselves, just eating, and somebody sits down and starts a conversation. And maybe it's been their weekend or their birthday that past week, or maybe they recently lost a loved one and they're trying to navigate the world as a single person again. And this sense of community across faith traditions and across civic groups and the support of the larger community here in Cache Valley is just really awe-inspiring, and I would encourage you to come. Any of the first and third Saturdays we serve between 11:30 and 1 at First Presbyterian. So these are some of the ways that Cache Community Connections reaches out to the broader world and Cache Valley and some of the activities that it is involved with. But there are a few that I'd like to talk about specifically from my faith community from St. Thomas. Back in 2020, remember that? It feels like a lifetime ago. In the relatively early days of the COVID pandemic, there was a major outbreak at the JBS meat plant in Hiram. At St. Thomas, our priest said, we've got to do something. And so literally within 2.5 days, we had started a community-wide event where food was donated. Some of the food was purchased because people would donate financial resources. Folks from across the community, representatives from wards, representatives from the university would come. They would sort the donated food, and then they would pack boxes. And we literally called people who were impacted by COVID, primarily in the south end of the valley, although we delivered food to Hiram, to southern Idaho, to Tremonton. We even took some food deliveries to Ogden. But we would call the families and find out exactly what they needed. So how many kids did they have? What were their dietary restrictions? What did they need in terms of cleaning and sanitation supplies? Remember back then we were supposed to wash our mail in every can that we got from the grocery store. And so folks came together. The food pantry, Little Lambs provided diapers and other supplies for infants. And then folks delivered this, and you'd call the home, you would tell them when you were coming, you would put the information on, the food and the cleaning supplies and whatever on their front porch. They'd be behind the windows waving. You'd get back into your car and you'd see the kids come out, and they were just so excited to see the food. This was an interfaith and civic initiative that started from a real need in our community. And it made a difference to the people who were receiving these food donations, and it helped all of us because they weren't having to go to the grocery stores when they might be contagious. And it really was a great opportunity as people talked across tables, as they were packing food boxes and so forth. Again, a way for people to provide their feedback and support to the community, coming from a faith tradition, coming from a non-faith tradition, but wanting to make a difference in that situation. Another activity that has come from St. Thomas Aquinas is the Circle of Friends gathering. Circle of Friends is a monthly gathering during the academic year that Carol Fote is now the person who organizes that. And we are bringing primarily women, but we've had guys come, and they're certainly always welcome, who get together for a lunch with a guest speaker. And that guest speaker might be representing a Holocaust survivor and her daughter. It might represent a community member whose dad was the candy man and dropped candy over Berlin at the end of World War II, when Berlin was being split into the east and west sides. And so here you have a group, primarily women, who are talking across their faith communities, and again, building a broader sense of what it means to be a diverse and inclusive and welcoming community. So whether we're looking at the role that Cash Community Connections, that CCC plays in our community, or we're looking at other organizations throughout Cache Valley, it really is a special place, and there are lots of ways to become involved and to make a difference yourself. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I've still got a couple of minutes, or is this the right time? It's time. All right, perfect timing then. Thank you very much.
Right on time. All right. Let's go to the next one here. All right, so the next speaker, I told I wouldn't give all of her awards and Grammys and everything because it would keep on going. But I want to invite Beth Beiseria up to the stage to talk about Catholic Inclusive Excellence. Let's give her a round of applause.
All right, thanks everyone. My name is Beth Boisserie, and I am a little nervous to talk to you today for a couple reasons. One I'll get to at the end of the session. But the other reason is because as a Catholic, I actually don't typically talk about my faith at all when I'm teaching. I emphasize critical pedagogies in my teaching and ways of signaling how we can signal to students that they belong at the university in a variety of ways. And so saying that you're Catholic actually can be a negative signal to students who identify as queer or Native students or students who are not religious. And so this is not something that I'm actually used to talking about in public. Haha, it worked. Okay, but I wanted to give you some background on me. So I'm the oldest of 7 kids, cradle Catholic. That's me with the red glasses. And this was taken, and I actually learned about social justice and diversity and inclusivity from my Catholic faith. So it's unfortunate that being religious and being inclusive are often seen as divisive. But this was about the time my mom pulled us out of public school to begin homeschooling us because she wanted to be able to teach us more about our faith. Side note about my mom, she was the smartest woman I have ever met. She only had her high school diploma, but I learned how to be a teacher from her. So my parents both joked that when it was time for elections, they always canceled each other's votes out. My mom tended to vote Democrat. My dad tends to vote Republican. He's watching. Hi, Dad. But I learned from both of them the idea of caring for your neighbor and for loving deeply and for honoring the dignity in every human person. From my mom, I learned to think critically, to be smart, to question what I don't know. Every time a missionary would come to our door, she would open it and invite them in, not to debate or to engage in the kind of conversation where no one listens, but to listen, to ask questions, to be inclusive of other religions. From my dad, I learned how to work hard. He had 3 jobs. He had a lot of kids to feed. And he, whenever, for example, the list at Thanksgiving came out with items you could donate to the food bank, he always bought everything on the list. I learned from him how to talk to everyone and to ask everyone how they were doing and to care. So, but after I'm really nervous. But after, about the time of this picture, my mom was also diagnosed with cancer. And so we went from trying to start homeschooling to actually just sort of being at home. And I raised my siblings while my mom fought cancer. And it was watching her deep faith at that time that was the hardest part of her life that has always stuck with me. About a year after she died, my father remarried someone who was also Catholic. But the way she lived her faith was very different. When someone would knock on the door, and this time I'm thinking of politicians canvassing for vote, the only question she would ever ask is this person pro-life? And unfortunately, then she was also mentally and emotionally abusive to my dad and my siblings and I. So I learned from that point that the idea of valuing a culture of life was absolutely more than just how you voted. It was more expansive than that. Okay, so when I was little, we were growing up, my dad was in the Navy, and so here's a variety of the Catholic churches from Alaska, from Oregon, from Paulsboro, Washington, near Seattle, that I grew up in. St. Joseph's Catholic Church was where my parents were married and where I was baptized. St. Paul's Catholic Church, this is the only place in the entire world where I can say my last name, Boisgery, and people know who I am, because they all, there's Boisgeries there. It's also a signal of how Catholicism is also connected to colonialism. This is a replica of the first St. Paul's Church, which is actually the first Catholic church in what is now the state of Oregon. Again, being Catholic and in a military family like Crystal meant that you always had some kind of community. So I didn't actually attend middle school or high school. I don't have a high school diploma, but they still hired me anyway. Turns out you don't need one. To teach at the university anyway. But after I transferred from the community college, I went to University of Portland, which is a Catholic university, because I wanted to learn more about my faith. And it was here where I really learned how to integrate the ideas of faith and social justice and inclusivity. It's the chapel. We have our alumni magazine has been rated really highly because rather than just saying here's alumni news, it continues to publish articles on faith and justice. This is a picture of our first Black president, also our first non-priest president, which was very big news. I took a class on Catholic social teaching at the university, and this is something that even I think a lot of Catholics don't necessarily know a lot about, but Catholic social teaching has 7 tenets that talk about the life and the dignity of the human person, family, community, and participation, rights and responsibilities, option for the poor and vulnerable, dignity and rights of workers, solidarity, and care for creation. And this comes from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and it says that Catholic social teaching is an essential element of our faith. So again, the idea that if you're actually going to live your faith, it needs to have an element of socialness and care for the community and for the common good. It's based on and inseparable from our understanding of human life and of human dignity. Of course, it's easy, particularly if you're a particular kind of religious person, to see human life and only think in one narrow way. But it's really meant to be very expansive, that everyone has an inherent dignity and a right to life consistent with that dignity. And just to give you a little bit more sense of some of these tenets, under life and dignity of the human person, the bishops write that the measure of every institution is whether it threatens or enhances the life and dignity of the human person. That the person is not only sacred but also social, and that we seek together the common good. That human dignity can be protected, but only if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met, and that we need to put the poor and the vulnerable first. Again, and this is where some folks might be like, oh, this doesn't seem quite as perhaps conservative on the side of, as I typically think of as Catholics, like it talks about the rights of workers, and the basic rights of workers must be respected. For solidarity, at the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. And if you want peace, you work for justice. And care for God's creation, that care for the earth is a requirement of our faith. We're called to protect people and the planet. Now, of course, I think everyone here who's religious, who's non-religious, recognizes that our values we don't always live up to, but these are the things that we're always working and striving for. I moved here to Utah 5 years ago when I was hired to be the director of composition and assistant professor. But before then, I lived for 17 years in Pullman, Washington, which is the home of Washington State University. So here's our altar at Sacred Heart Parish. Pullman is only about 35,000 people, so it's pretty small. Our parish is pretty small too. Here in the middle, altar servers on the ends are my two godchildren, and the one in the middle is Benjamin. He's now 14 and 6 feet tall. He's very proud of himself. Here's some pictures of our priest, Father Steve. I love this picture, like I am your father with Darth Vader on it. You have to have a priest who has a sense of humor. We've been talking a little bit about tensions between religions and which religion considers themselves the one true church. Obviously, Catholics have an opinion about that. But we discovered when we moved here that there are other universities that are also cougars. And my two children who were born in Pullman, the tension between one true church is nothing compared to the tension between who might be the true cougar. So you can talk to them about cougars. Here's my second son, Samuel, and his confirmation sponsor, Elle. But at this church, I think we really did a good job at connecting social justice and our faith. The church has read books like The White Catholic's Guide to Racism and Privilege to better understand the structural sins of racism. We do things with the Scouts to promote their faith. The bench is recycled plastic bags. Hi, Francie, I know you're watching on Zoom. But our church also has an LGBTQ welcome potluck, which is led by Elle. And I know that many people when they think of Catholic, they don't think of being inclusive of queer folks. That's not actually true of all churches. There are a number of churches across the United States where that is, again, part of our faith. So when I was at Sacred Heart, I taught Sunday school for about 10 years, off and on. And one of the things that I did when I taught is I wanted to make sure that the classroom where I was teaching was also inclusive. This is an image of, first of all, no, Catholics do not worship Mary, but we feel like if you're the Mother of God, you might have some influence. So we do honor and revere and ask her to pray for us. But this is an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, who appeared to St. Juan Diego in the 1500s in Mexico as an indigenous woman, as an Aztec woman. When I went to a church in Portland that had a predominant Korean population, the statue of Mary was Korean. And so it is not uncommon across the Catholic Church to have Mary and the Holy Family represented in a variety of cultural backgrounds. We also learned about the saints and about people who were living the lives of their faith. Dorothy Day, journalist and social activist, Sister Thea Bowman, who advocated for racial justice, St. Oscar Romero of San Salvador, who originally was not essentially promoting social justice and options for the poor, and then later came to fight for that and was martyred because of that. St. Maximilian Kolbe, who, when he found out that there was a man with a family who was scheduled to die in Auschwitz, he gave up his spot so that the man could live. And of course, Mother Teresa. So just ways to teach the kids about what are the everyday ways and the extraordinary ways that we live our faith and connect it to justice. Here's some of the materials I used. This was an Advent calendar that we had that I still have, and a copy of and love, and one of my students absolutely loved that Advent calendar because the people on it looked like her. Mary and Jesus and Joseph looked like her. We had a book on Dear Pope Francis where kids from across the world wrote questions to Pope Francis, and the Pope answered them. And our priest, Father Steve, I had the kids write questions to Father Steve, and he came in and answered them. The emphasis was on the idea of, like, we learn more through questioning. I had my students do a little bit more writing than they thought they should have done for religious education, but I was like, sorry, you're stuck with it. I also tried to deepen my own faith. St. Gertrude's Monastery is in Cottonwood, Idaho. It's a very special place for me. There's nothing like learning about your faith with some liberal Catholic badass nuns. Who are like, we are going to take care of people, and we are going to care about everyone, including creation. This is an image of the monastery. It's also a special place for me because, for another reason. So often we think of the ideas that your sexuality is based on how you were born. You're either born gay, you're born straight, but that we don't talk a lot about the idea that your sexuality can actually shift, and it does shift for some people. And it did for me in my mid-30s, which was not unwelcome, but definitely unexpected. This is the place where I first came out to my friend Elle, who is also queer and Catholic, at St. Gertrude's Monastery, surrounded by God and love and some badass nuns. I just have to say that a lot. And so for me, when people are like, they say discriminating against queer folk discriminating is something I want to do. Supporting queer folk is against my religion. I can't untangle my sexuality and my religion. They are completely intertwined. That said, it was absolutely challenging to come out later in life in your mid-30s. And I'm going to read this part in terms of living with contradictions. It's not uncommon for queer and trans people to struggle with mental health, to decide that it's better not to remain on the planet than to live with the constant stress of rejection and condemnation. I look back at that time and I again think about a culture of life and how anyone who wants to support a culture of life also has to be committed to LGBTQ people and their mental health. Fortunately, because of my religious convictions, I never for one moment doubted that God loved me. I went to one church and just sat in front of the crucifix, which Catholics value because in addition to the resurrection, which is of course important, it's a reminder to us that Jesus was human and suffered and was condemned for who he was. And that he is with us, both when we suffer and when we cause others to suffer. This particular crucifix is actually at St. Thomas Aquinas, my local church, and the artist intentionally modeled the face of Jesus from a Jewish man, which I think is a lovely touch of religious inclusivity. I fortunately had a queer Catholic mentor, and Elle said something that has always stuck with me. We're queer and we're Catholic. We live with contradictions. After I got my PhD, I knew I needed to be someplace where I could be both queer and Catholic, and I asked myself, where could that place be? And the answer is Northern Utah, which was not the answer I think anyone was expecting. But it's a place where people who are queer can have very meaningful conversations about religion, both how it sustains us and acknowledge how our religions have caused us trauma. And I want to say, too, that my community, my neighborhood community, which is predominantly Latter-day Saints, is also inclusive of us in another way. They have ministered to us and have made us part of their neighborhood, not because they're trying to convert us, but because we are their neighbors. I think Krista's watching, so hello, Krista, and thank you. However, also don't think, because of my religious beliefs, that it is a contradiction to be queer and Catholic. I personally believe that being discriminatory is more the contradiction. But I would encourage people from a variety of faiths to look at where in their religious tradition there are examples of literature, of teachings that that model how to be inclusive and religious at the same time. One of those for me is U.S. Catholic, a magazine I subscribe to, which has talked about anti-racism on college campuses, which has talked about healing harm from colonization for Native communities, which talks about climate crisis, neurodivergence, a variety of topics. Someone else I'd like to introduce you to, because I think these folks can be helpful whether you're Catholic or whether you're looking more at ecumenical interdenominational conversations, is Sister Joan Chittister. Again, amazing. But I'll just say a couple quotes from her. Anything that degrades or demeans or destroys a person in any way is not love, no matter how loudly proclaimed. She says either we're all receptacles of grace or we're not. And she quoted someone who said, "Where could I turn when the place that was the foundation of my life was the place that was causing the pain?" I am a Catholic woman, a member of the body of Christ. I am not a burden or a nuisance. I am intelligent, capable, and lovable. She says that when any group feels that they have the right to destroy, enslave, suppress, or ignore any other part of the human race, God is not there. So another person that I wanted to introduce is Father Brian Massingale, who's talked a lot about racial justice in the Catholic Church and combating the structural sin of racism. He's also a Black gay priest, and he says, "I need to come to you with all parts of my identity in order for you to understand who I am and how I live." He has a couple words that I think are really helpful for our particular symposium today. He says there are some, perhaps many, who are not here because they've been so hurt, so wounded, so traumatized by their church, synagogue, temple, or mosque that they cannot be here. They may be people who have wounds and scars of exclusion. And he says to us, to all of us, you are loved, you are lovable, you are sacred because you are God's image. There's also resources like New Ways Ministry, which is the LGBT advocacy group for Catholics. I know that there are similar LGBT Catholic or advocacy groups for other religions. Finally, after 40 years, after Sister Janine had been sort of pushed away from the church and chastised by the Vatican, now she's able to meet with the Pope. And the Pope, I think, is also a model of inclusive excellence because he's like, really, we want to be ministers of mercy above all. He writes a lot. We're not reading all of this. But the idea that one of the things is like we have to care about our common home. We have to care about creation. We have to have intergenerational solidarity. And that it can't be just a political issue, that it has to be a priority. He also has that famous line, "Who am I to judge?" And he asks a question that I think is helpful in terms of the binary. Does God endorse the existence of this person with love or reject and condemn this person? And obviously, Pope Francis is asking us to realize, like, there's a right answer here. So he's essentially saying that we can't only be single issue. Like, if all of us are living our faith, regardless of what that faith tradition is, that we have to recognize how we intersect with each other. So people have asked, now that my sexuality has shifted, why do I stay in this church? Why don't I go to another church? And the answer is because I'm Catholic. Because Sister Joan Chittister said, I stay in the church because there's nowhere else I know that satisfies me in a sacramental life that makes all life sacred. And I stay because I believe in a deep, sustaining love that equates faith with justice. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. All right. How's everyone doing? Still good? Still good? I'm just back there living my dreams. Here we go. All right. So now I want to welcome to the stage the Bonnie Glass-Coffin to talk about building a welcoming campus for all Aggies. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. How you doing? It's so great to be here. This has been so fun. I've had such a good time. You know, I was just telling Isaiah a few minutes ago, I've been doing this work, lifting up conversations about orientations around religion on campus for over 10 years. And some of you know the work that I've done in the Interfaith Initiative. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm really passionate about this work, but what I'm so passionate about today is that this is becoming a campus-wide conversation. And every conversation that I've heard from people, it's like, oh yeah, that's part of it, that's part of it, that's part of it, that's part of it. And so it's just so great to see those reflections. Back in the beginning, when I started doing this work in the dark ages, we were still having conversations about whether or not it's okay to talk about one's closely held religious and spiritual orientations at a public university campus. And the basic bottom line, we spent a whole year talking about that question. Should we really be encouraging students to talk about these things? Right? Thank goodness we have come to this place. So I'm excited to be part of this. So today I want to talk a little bit about our former president, Noel Cockett, created this wonderful event back in 2019 called the Luminary. Some of you may have been there, remembered it, and it was this fantastic way of welcoming all new Aggies to campus. And I was so touched by her conversation where she said, as part of her speech that day, what I want you to remember as you come to this new place, as you begin making new friends, as you leave your home, as you are scared, perhaps, about coming to this foreign environment, what I want you to remember is that now you are part of the Aggie family. You are part of an Aggie family. You are not alone. You belong here. But the question that was left for me at the end of that conversation was, how welcoming is this Aggie family to all who orient around religion and spirituality differently? And I was left with some thoughts and some worries and concerns based on some of the work that we've been doing with the Interfaith Initiative and with some research that led to that 10 years ago. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what our particular challenges are on this campus and how we can address those challenges and what can make USU a more welcoming place for all Aggies. We've had multiple presentations talking about the demographic on our campus, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. And in fact, this slide is a little bit old, but things haven't changed too much. I think we're slightly bigger than we were then. I think it's closer to 28,000 than 24,000, about half of whom are on our main campus, mainly white, largely LDS, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, mainly from Utah and the Intermountain West. And so I don't think that demographic has changed too much. We all know that. We all know what our campus demographic is. We all probably also know that Utah is one of the most homogeneously religious states in the nation. In fact, this graphic that shows religious diversity by county, this is county-level data. Blue is the most least religiously diverse, and the way that they asked the question was, how likely are you in the course of a day or a week or a month to interact with people who are not of your particular identity? And the bluer the response, the more homogeneous it was, the less likely. Well, look at Utah. Here we are, right? In fact, Utah is one of the most religiously homogeneous states in the U.S. We are a faith-predominant campus, but we are also a campus where religion is very apparent, right? In 2016, I know they've turned down the LDS Institute at the moment, so that pretty picture, you don't see the LDS Institute anymore. We're building a new one, right? But back in 2016, and I think it's still the case, about half of our on-campus students, undergrads, were also taking classes at the Institute and going to Institute activities and living in the dorms and talking to their friends. And so regardless of being a public university campus where we don't talk about religion, right, we are a very religious campus. And so we have to deal with the problem of religious privilege, right? Yeah, I spoke a little bit about this in the training that I did yesterday, but I want to spend a little more time on it today, right? We all probably know what privilege is, right? And probably have had experiences with discussions of privilege when it comes to race, when it comes to class, when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to socioeconomic status, etc., when it comes to several other markers of protected categories, as Tanisha talked about earlier. But of course, religion is also an area where we have to talk about privilege, which, if I want to read what the slide says, is simply unearned access to resources, i.e. social power, that are only readily available to some people because of their social group membership. It's an advantage or immunity granted to or enjoyed by one societal group above and beyond the common advantage of all other groups. Privilege is often invisible to those who have it, and that's the key, right? So I want to change the slide up, and for those of you who are on Zoom today, I think there's about 40 of you, hi out there, I'm going to ask you also to change things up and put your screens on gallery view and just notice what happens here. Instead of standing, I'm going to ask those of you who can answer yes to the following questions to remain sitting. And those of you who would have to answer no to these following questions to please stand. And on the screen, those of you who can answer yes to these questions, mute your screen. And those of you who have to answer no, reveal yourselves. Why? Because those who don't have privilege are often standing out there in ways that they cannot be invisible. And that can be pretty uncomfortable. So please stand if you have to answer no to this question. Do you know more than 30 people here at USU or in Cache Valley who share your particular religious or non-religious identity? Okay. Look around. Notice who's standing, and notice, how does it feel to be standing? Remain standing if it is if it is not easy to enroll your children in nearby private educational institutions that reflect your orientation around religion. P.S., seminary and institute are examples of these private religious educational institutions. Okay. So if most of the politicians who represent you share your orientation to religion, and we heard yesterday how many of our legislators identify as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So if most of your legislators share that orientation, go ahead and sit down. Those of you who are standing, notice. Like, how does it feel, right? How about this one? I'm going to skip a few just in the interest of time. How about if your roommates or neighbors are quite knowledgeable and positive about your orientation around religion, you can go ahead and sit down. Okay. And how about the last two? If you feel quite confident that you can express or practice your orientation without being mocked or misunderstood, or I would add stereotyped or made assumptions about, if you're pretty sure that isn't you, go ahead and sit down. Again, look around. Finally, if you feel confident that your children won't be bullied or physically harmed because of your family's orientation to religion, go ahead and sit down. Look around, notice, and think, how does it feel to be out there
noticed in a way that maybe doesn't feel too comfortable? And those of you who are sitting, did you ever think about these ways in which you might have religious privilege? Go ahead and sit down, everybody. And I probably don't have time for us to have a robust conversation around this, but I would just like for you to think about other examples of religious privilege that come to mind. Right? Think about ways in which your life works differently because you are not a member of the majority religion, or the ways in which your life works if you are. And how does this religious privilege impact campus climate? Well, we did some research, first qualitative back in 2013 and 2014 when I was doing the initial work that led to the Interfaith Initiative, and then later we participated in a nationwide survey that was a cohort-based survey that was offered to students over a 3-year period, beginning in their freshman year and following them until they became seniors, asking questions about how experiences on campus impacted their lives in terms of making them more aware of and more appreciative of religious diversity. It was called IDEALS, the Interfaith Diversity Experiences, Attitudes, Longitudinal Survey. We were one of 25 public universities in a total of about 122 universities that participated in this study. And what we learned through this study, and the results are published on our website at interfaith.usu.edu. What we learned is that USU is not a very welcoming place. In fact, compared to our peers, we were considered more divisive, more cliquish, less welcome, and more coercive by about 20% than our public university peers who were part of our cohort. We were perceived as being more religious, less diverse. USU was less welcoming of specific groups, especially atheists and non-believers, more divisive, more cliquish, and students felt more coerced, right? As you might imagine, we need to do something about that to make our campus more welcoming, right? But what do we do, and what are some of the obstacles that we might encounter? Well, one of the obstacles that we might encounter has to do with how people feel about bringing their whole selves to the table. We heard from Tanisha some great examples of why it's so important to be able to bring your whole self to the table, how that can make an institution feel so much more welcoming. And back 10 years ago, when I gathered a bunch of people, some of whom are in this room, around tables to have conversations about, is your orientation around religion important to you? Do you want to be able to talk about it on campus? If yes, do you feel like you can do so? And why not? We learned that almost 89% of our students said, yes, this is an important part of who I am, right? I want to be able to talk about it. We also learned that most of our students didn't feel comfortable. Instead, they stayed in their bubbles of religious or non-religious identity, or spiritual but not religious, or formerly religious, or post-religious. They stayed in their bubbles, right? And that doesn't make for a very welcoming place when we're a campus full of bubbles. Some of the reasons that students still didn't feel comfortable are listed here. There was something called fears of Mormon bashing by our students who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There were fears of being judged as immoral. There were fears of not wanting to come out of the religious closet. I even wrote an article for the Huffington Post called Coming Out of the Religious Closet in Utah, because it turns out when I was talking to people that many students were less willing to talk to their parents about no longer wanting to be a member of their parents' church. They were less willing to do that than to come out as gay. So this is a big deal in our state, right? It's the elephant in the room. And as one atheist student in that study commented, sure, I feel like it's okay to believe as I do, as long as I don't bring it up, right? Which doesn't translate to a welcoming campus. And so that's what began the USU Interfaith Initiative, which has created over the last 10 years curricular and co-curricular initiatives and events to create a more welcoming campus for all who orient around religion differently, including the non-religious, including the religious but not spiritual, including the spiritual but not religious, etc. We do this through building capacity to share authentically, to engage appreciatively, to identify common values, to come together for the common good. We've done a lot of really cool things with the initiative. I am really proud of this work. We hosted in 2017 a statewide training. Does that say I have 5 minutes? Okay. We hosted a statewide training that brought students from 14 universities, including all of USU's distance campuses, and BYU and Weber and UVU, to campus to have a 2-day training back in 2017. And we sent those students back out to their universities to become allies and interfaith leaders. We have this Better Together Interfaith Ally training that we occasionally offer if people ask, where it's a 3-hour training that I'm going to do a very abbreviated version of this afternoon, where people can learn the basic skills of how to share who they are, right? We use I statements, Tanisha. Yeah, that's important, right? And how to appreciate who others are, how to cultivate what was termed differently by Isaiah the other day, but what I would call holy envy, right? How to appreciate the values and the actions of someone of a different orientation. We have the Interfaith Leadership Certificate Program, 70 students every semester learning how to engage with each other in discussion in order to build capacity to have these conversations that their parents said that they really ought not to talk about on campus. And every student in that class says, wow, this class should be required for everybody. I don't want to I don't want to pursue the certificate, but now I know what it means to be an interfaith leader, and I'm going to go out in my career as a doctor, a lawyer, et cetera, and I'm going to know how to engage with people in better ways, right? 150 students a year take that course. We have the Interfaith Student Association. Yesterday you heard from Andrew Hunting. He was great, talking about his own journey and the journey of one of his friends, August, in being able to sort of come out of the religious closet, right? We have campus-wide reflection rooms. If any of you need to pray or have a place for quiet reflection, we've got it. TSC 310A and military science, right? You can go, you can pray, you can get away, you can do your Juma prayers, right? Student research projects. We also engage with mental health, with CAPS. We founded this Faith Challenges support group, right? I'm so glad Tyler is doing this great work on a larger scale, and Chris Babbitt's, and so many people, and wow, it's just so great to see all of the ways in which these conversations are happening, right? To come out of our bubbles and learn to share who we are, to learn how to listen deeply and appreciatively to others, to build bridges across difference. We are about creating the vision, the knowledge, and the skills to make this campus a more welcoming place. You want a little bit of taste of some of the skills that we are into cultivating? Come to the workshop at 1. Otherwise, I hope to see you on campus, in classes, with conversations. I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now I would like to invite one of our great students, Maggie, onto the stage to talk about religion and sustainability and the intersection. So let's give her a round of applause.
Hi, good afternoon. Let me grab the clicker before I start. Right. So I was asked to speak on religion and sustainability and the intersection between the two. And before I get started, I kind of wanted to give a little background of myself and also my kind of religious upbringing and religious background. So I'm a senior here currently at Utah State University. I do a lot of different academics. I dabble in a lot of different things, so I won't give you the whole boring spiel, but to kind of sum it up, I study international studies focused on climate change and climate migration. So I'm in a natural resource and agricultural policy classes, and I kind of study on how that'll affect widespread human migration and human climate change. I also minor in sociology, anticipatory intelligence, a couple other boring things, but basically I just stay super busy and I never get to sleep. So, as most students do. Also here on campus, I talk about this a little later, I work in the USU Sustainability Department. I'm also the USUSA Chief of Staff, so I work for USU Student Government, and I also am in the Government Relations Council, so I do a lot of policy making and policy building here on campus. A little bit of background about me personally, just so you understand exactly where I'm coming and biases that I may have as I go through this talk. I was raised skeptically LDS. You're probably like, I've never even heard of that. I have no idea what that means. That's okay, I'll explain it. I was raised in a Southern Baptist town in Virginia. It's very similar to the basically BYU of Southern Baptist. So I was raised near Liberty University, and I was the absolute black sheep. So whenever somebody tells me that they're not LDS and they grew up in Provo, I'm like, oh, I know exactly how that feels. So I was raised in an area where I got to really expand what I believed, my religious background and my religious beliefs. I hesitate to call myself just Latter-day Saint because I was raised differently than most Latter-day Saints. I wasn't raised here in Utah, for example. I was raised in an area where I was the only Latter-day Saint in my entire high school. This also provided me with opportunities to visit and learn from so many different belief systems under the age of 18. So by the time I turned 18, I had been to Catholic Mass, I'd been to a Sikh temple service, I'd been to a Hindi temple service, I presented to a Holocaust survivor in a Jewish synagogue and got to see their worship service. I've been to a Scientology exhibit, which I think was fascinating for me personally. I've been to multiple Southern Baptist worship services and multiple summer camps with them, and I've been to Congregational Muslim Mosque, where every Friday they pray. Super, super fascinating. So I really like to think of myself as kind of well-rounded. There's so many religions out there. I haven't touched on all of them, but I have been able to see and experience a lot of different ones. After learning about all these different things, I decided to serve a full-time mission as a Latter-day Saint in Germany. While I was in Germany, I got to experience a lot more religions. I served in Germany, and I was in Germany while the Russian-Ukrainian war happened. And so I was working a lot with Ukrainian refugees coming in, teaching ESL. I got to do more of, if any of you are familiar, sort of a service mission. I was teaching ESL, I was helping with natural disaster relief, I was doing Red Cross. I never knocked a single door, so don't get mad at me, I'm not one of them. And I just had a great time. It was super interesting. But I was also able to work with a lot of atheists, a lot of people from the Middle East who had never heard of Jesus Christ, and it was really eye-opening as well for this idea of religion and a religious awakening, a religious identity in myself. I am still a practicing Latter-day Saint. I still do go to church, and I am still active in the church. However, I do love to have religious conversations. I took religions around the world my junior year of high school and kind of set me on this path of just really wanting to unlock and discover what other religions believe about things such as sustainability. So what is USU Sustainability? I just wanted to give kind of an overview of the department because we're semi-new, or new-ish in relation to other departments. USU Sustainability USU Sustainability engages students in events, fights food waste, and works to include sustainability in relevant curriculum. So this is a department on campus that really tries to incorporate sustainable practices campus-wide in infrastructure and structural problems. We also have the Sustainability Club. They work more specifically with student engagement and with student involvement. So we're more about campus-wide involvement and structural changes about sustainability. Just a definition of sustainability in case most of you probably aren't like me in studying sustainability. The definition of sustainability is the avoidance of the depletion of natural resources to maintain an ecological balance. Basically what that means is we're trying to make sure that we don't use more than what we have. We're trying to make sure that we use what we can, but leave for the next generation. And one of the big things is USU is committed to carbon neutrality by 2040, which is a very, very ambitious goal. So the USU Sustainability Department is the department that works to ensure that that can actually happen across campus. And then what do? I'll walk over here so you can read it and I'm not standing in your way. What do? I'm the USU Sustainability Marketing and Community Outreach Assistant. That's basically just fancy for saying I run social medias and I help do all community outreach. So right now we have a huge program going on called Make a Blanket Statement, where we're asking faculty to trade in their space heater so that we can give them an electric blanket to decrease emissions across our campus. And I'm the lead for that. And just trying to get the community involved, trying to get USU involved, and trying to also get the wider Logan Cache Valley involved in sustainability. So my description right here, it says to engage the campus community through social media content, press releases, and partnerships, also to level up visibility of the sustainability program, to get more students engaged while integrating sustainability into USU. So if you're wondering why my slides look so pretty, that's because that's part of my job description. So how does sustainability and religion intersect? As I dove into this topic, I thought it would be really cool to highlight different religious beliefs and what they believe about not only the creation, but also about sustainability. I think it's fascinating because as you dive into most religions, or just belief systems in general, you'll find that pretty much every single one has some type of belief about nature, or about spirituality, or about Mother Earth in general. So just to go through a few, Christianity, one that I would assume most of us are pretty familiar with. Most Christians believe that God created the earth in 6 days, and that we are stewards of it. This is a very typical, common Christian belief. Latter-day Saints believe it, Catholics believe it. It's pretty overall Christian, and that's in Genesis chapter 1. In Islam, which I became really familiar with as I was in Germany, they believe that Allah created the heavens and the earth. Allah is their way of saying God. Allah created the heavens and the earth, and all that is between in 6 days. So very, very similar to what Christians believe, and that's in the Quran chapter 7, verse 54. Scientology, which I always love to bring in because it is a form of belief system. It's a religion in itself. It is what a lot of people tend to believe in these days, too. So in Scientology, they believe that the life force present in all living, which they call theta, was created the physical universe of matter, energy, space, and time. Interesting parallel, right? This was from L. Ron Hubbard, who was the founder of Scientology back in the 1960s. In Hinduism, they believe that the universe was created by Brahma, the creator, who made the universe out of himself. And this is in I'm going to butcher it, so I'm not going to say it. This is in their holy book, in chapter 2, verse 5. And then lastly, Buddhism. The beginning of this world is inconceivable, since they have no beginning or end. The world was not created once upon a time, but has been created a million of times. That was said by the Dalai Lama. I've studied Buddhism a lot. I'm still not completely sure what exactly this means, but I think that the overall concept is that they don't really know how the world started. They don't know when the world's going to end, and they just believe that it will continue to exist no matter what happens. So throughout all these religions, we see a sense of belief and sense of knowing that this world is important, that this is an important part of what we are here to do, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I feel like in today's day and age, we get so caught up in the importance of differences, especially across religion. We focus on the differences that we all have, whether they're small or big. That's what we decide to show and to give to everybody around us. So in my little TED talk, I guess, I wanted to explain that we're pretty similar. Sustainability is something that we actually have in common across a majority of religions. Now, I will say this is not every single religion out there. I couldn't dive into all of them, but I wanted to choose some of the main ones that I've heard and I've seen in my time. So before I get into this, I also just wanted to say I really wanted to give a shout out to my fiance who has supported me throughout everything. He's not here today. I got hit by a car about a week and a half ago, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make this talk. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. He's been a huge supporter of me. He's been there for me every step of the way. We got married in 11 days, so we're super excited. Thank you. Thank you. But I just wanted to make sure that I shout him out because he has listened to this presentation about 3 times now. So thank you to him. So I also wanted to touch on a few religious groups here in Cache Valley that actually work on sustainability measures. So I did some digging. I'd already heard of a few of these. Some of these I had not heard of, so maybe I can enlighten you all as well. But religion and sustainability is a point that most people intersect on because, as I showed earlier, most religions have a common belief in saving the world, protecting the climate. There are many different religious groups. These are a few that are in Cache Valley. The first one that has done so much I cannot talk enough about are the Cache Valley Unitarian Universalists. Their motto is Universalists value and promote peace, liberty, social justice, and environmental sustainability through personal, community, and global action. If you check out their website, they've done protests, they've done strikes. Oh, my goodness. Sorry about that. They've done protests, they've done strikes, they've done things to ensure that sustainability is being talked about here in Cache Valley. They also partner with something that I didn't put up here, which is the Cache Community Connections, which is a program that helps working to connect neighbors with neighbors and diversify the groups here in Cache Valley. And they've done a lot religiously and in the realm of sustainability and religion with Cache Community Connections in that regard. Another common one that I had, actually the only one up here that I had heard of, full disclosure, was the Mormon Environmental Stewardship Alliance. This is a nonprofit group not affiliated with the church, but is a group of LDS Mormons, and their motto is a community that find faith-affirming work in caring and advocating for God's creation, and acting as grateful beneficiaries and wise stewards of the earth to further his purposes. They do a lot in Salt Lake. They have a chapter here in Cache Valley, but they tend to travel and move a lot to ensure that people down in the legislature and in the House are hearing their complaints, they're hearing their concerns about climate change, and they're doing it out of the purpose that they believe that God is put this world here for a reason, that this is his creation, and that they want to further that. The Cache Environmental Council is more focused on environmental organizations and environmental work. However, they partner with religious organizations to make that possible. So they have a monthly council where they come together. I'll just read this: uniting environmental and religious organizations and their volunteers in and around Cache Valley and sharing ideas, upcoming events, and ongoing services. I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this topic more, checking them out. They do awesome work, terrific work. They love to get discussions together. They love to speak with one another about how sustainability and religion intersects. They've done a ton here in Cache Valley also, just with like landscaping, gardening, sustainability, composting. They're a nonprofit organization that's just partnered with so many different partisan groups and religious organizations to make that possible here in Cache Valley. I cannot talk enough about them. They're awesome. Interfaith Power and Light is an Episcopalian group that's here in Cache Valley and also across Utah. Their goal is to inspire, educate, and collaborate with faith communities to promote earth stewardship, clean energy, and climate justice. Truth be told, I had never heard of them before this presentation, but after doing some sleuthing on the internet, they are awesome. They are so cool. They have published articles through the Herald, through the Salt Lake Tribune. They talk all the time about sustainability. They talk about how religion and sustainability work together. One of their biggest mottos is religious freedom equals, Religious freedom equals climate change for everyone. Something like that. I probably just butchered that. But one of their big ideas is that if there's religious freedom in the world, then we're able to make climate change happen. Because religions really do come together to make that possible. And when you do diversify enough groups, you're actually able to make the change and see the change that you want to in sustainability and across the world. They are super awesome. They do not yet have a chapter here in Cache Valley. They're more in Salt Lake and in southern Utah. But I did want to highlight them just because they are doing exactly what my presentation today is all about, connecting those religious beliefs with their sustainability practices. Just in closing, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the UN Conference on Religious Freedom. So I am, truth be told, like I said, an international studies major. So I study a lot about international and global problems and changes, specifically in climate change and climate migration. And at the UN Council of Religious Freedom, one of the big points from this past year was actually sustainability. And I read up about a lot of what they've talked about, and I also watched a couple videos, and they have probably the biggest group of diverse religions working on sustainability in the world. They're the United Nations, so you'd probably expect that. But they are doing incredible work. The UN Council on Religious Freedom, the opening keynote speaker, who I cannot remember his name right now, I think it was the Commissioner General, he said almost every faith tradition speaks about the importance of taking care of creation. It's not just a fad, but a sacred duty. If religions had no freedom to have a voice, there would be far less thinking and arguably doing on how to address climate change. Many faiths, one planet. I also love this picture specifically. This was in a Middle Eastern country. Well, I'm not sure if you've heard of Pakistan. Pakistan experienced extreme flooding last year. They had over 30 million deaths, over 28 million people displaced, and the UN sent no funding. And in the wake of what happened, this picture was taken. And they had all of the different faith groups represented in Pakistan. Pakistan is mainly a Muslim country. However, they've loosened, this is a strong word, but they've loosened religious intolerance a little bit so that they allow Christians, and they allow Buddhism, and they allow Taoism now. And this was a protest that they did after the United Nations did not send them any funding. And I just want to put my own word in that coming together religiously and coming together no matter our religious differences to try to protect the planet is one of the most powerful things that my generation, our generation can do to make a difference in climate change. Because a lot of people, especially policymakers, I worked in Governor Cox's office for about 8 months, and I loved it. It was super fun. It was a great time. I'm not going to get into my political beliefs just because this isn't the place, but I did work on the Hill for a while. Something that I noticed while I worked there was that they listen more when the group is diverse. When you have a group of multiple different perspectives coming and all arguing for the same thing, that's when they're listening. That's when they're willing to make a change. That's when they want to see a change. Because they see that the representation of their constituents is there. They see that there's more than just one group. They see that everybody is represented, not just a few people. I just want to leave with my last little note. Climate change is coming. I'm sure there are still some climate change deniers out there. That's okay. We can disagree. But the earth is warming. Like I said, I'm from a little town in Southern Virginia called Lynchburg. If you've never heard of it, that's okay. Liberty University is there. If you've heard of it, I like you even more now. But it's very, very small. But I grew up kind of poor on an island on the east coast of Virginia called the Eastern Shore. If you've heard of that, I'll be super surprised. But maybe you've heard of Chincoteague, I don't know. But that's also on this island. I moved away from the Eastern Shore when I was 8. They have now lost about 10 feet of land due to coastal flooding. And the house where I grew up is no longer there due to coastal flooding. I know that as we come together as a group to fight climate change, no matter our religious background, no matter what you believe, we're able to make a difference. We're able to see the changes that we want to see. And I also know that despite religious differences across the world, we're all human, and we're all one. Thank you.
I now want to welcome Dr. Richard West to the stage to talk about Cache Community Connections. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. I noticed that we have quite a collection of glasses of water up here. So if any of you get thirsty, we have plenty. Listen, I'm really grateful to be part of this symposium. What a wonderful opportunity this is, and I'm grateful to all of those who have created this opportunity for us to talk about and discuss some really important things. Now, I do have to say, as one who is coming towards the end of the formal presentations, is there really all this that we can say about religious inclusivity, and I really do have to express appreciation and admiration to some of those who've gone ahead and said all the really important things. And I'm going to speak specifically about Father Jason, who spoke earlier today. He's as we know, the vicar of St. John's Episcopal Church, and he talked a little bit about Cash Community Connections. Kathy Chudova spoke a little bit about Cash Community Connections. And guess what? I'm going to speak a little bit about Cash Community Connections. One might say, well, hold it. Do you really have anything else to say? And my response is, as a recovering professor, I always have something to say. And so that's the way things go. So Cash Community Connections, such a wonderful organization. You've heard about its founding. It's not unique, but it is a bit unusual among interfaith groups and councils because it includes this civic component as well. And I think that has given us a sense of stability over the years that has contributed greatly to the ability of Cash Community Connections to perform its work in the community and bring representatives from many different faiths together, but for a purpose. Now, Cash Community Connections, as I said, both interfaith and civic. You've heard about all of the rest of those things, but let's talk just a little bit about the purposes and objectives. To bring diverse religious and civic leaders together in the belief that spiritual leadership and unity are vital to the well-being of the community. Getting this out in front and recognizing the role of spiritual leadership and unity and its role in the community, I think, is critically important. To engage in educational activities designed to increase community awareness of and respect for religious and cultural diversity. To bring religiously and culturally diverse groups together in task-oriented, community-enhancing projects. I'll talk a little bit more about that one in just a minute. And to encourage and support community activities that are, by their very nature, religiously and culturally unifying. Now, in the 22 years since its founding, CCC has continued in accomplishing all of these, shall we say, mission statements. Its members differ in religious beliefs and tenets, and even priorities to some degree, but there are certain values that are fundamental to all enduring societies and cultures. Love and hospitality for neighbors and service to one another, especially to those in greatest need, are fundamental principles found in virtually all enduring traditions. Our shared values with people of faith have compelled us to build bridges of interfaith understanding. And I like this concept of bridges because it's something that spans, that connects two areas, two geographies in a sense. And as we use a bridge, it doesn't mean that any one of us participating in this process has to give up any turf, but we can collaborate across the bridge. So bridges of interfaith understanding that foster relationships of racial harmony and promote fairness for all throughout society. One of the events, Kathy mentioned this in her presentation, one of the events that Cash Community Connections sponsors every year is a celebration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm going to speak about him in several different ways. But this represents one of 70 different programs sponsored by Cash Community Connections every single year. So there are a lot of these events. Now, throughout my professional career as a behavioral psychologist, I've studied human behavior and learning in family settings, schools and neighborhoods, and communities. I've researched the factors that increase the likelihood of patterns of antisocial behavior, particularly in young people, and those variables that seem to prevent the emergence of those troubling tendencies. I've researched interventions to improve learning and to promote healthy relationships. Overwhelming evidence now confirms that communities with low neighborhood attachment and high levels of disorganization, where many residents do not know or associate with one another and are not committed to continuing relationships, have higher rates of adult and juvenile crime and drug trafficking. Conversely, communities that care protect and support their citizens by developing and encouraging relationships that bridge social, cultural, and economic divisions. A community's citizens become neighbors to one another when they become aware of their mutual experiences, challenges, successes, and perspectives. On January 14th of 2018, Maya El-Ghanati, Executive Director of ING, addressed the Shia Association of the Bay Area in their Martin Luther King event. El-Ghanati began with a quote from Dr. King about neighbors. "The ultimate measure of a person is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands in times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his or her position, his or her prestige, and even his or her life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he or she will lift some bruised and beaten brother or sister to a higher and more noble life." El-Ghanati continued, "I want to reflect on this extraordinary quote of Martin Luther King because it truly reflects my Islamic teachings on rights of neighbors, and also because being neighborly has never been more important than today, when our national political leaders are exemplifying just the opposite in their behavior. The latter reality should call us to duty. During politically contentious and difficult times, like the time we're living in, ordinary people like you and me must take the initiative, be proactive, and take up the responsibility for creating a more caring and compassionate nation. We cannot rely on others to do this for us. Neighborliness is not only a civic virtue that is fundamental to our Constitution under responsibilities of citizenship, it is also a religious obligation commanded by God and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In the Quran, chapter 4, verse 36, "Worship God and associate nothing with God, and be virtuous towards parents and kin, toward orphans and the indigent, toward the neighbor who is of kin and the neighbor who is not of kin." And another quote, also from the Quran. Those of you who were with us yesterday saw this quote. Mustafa shared this yesterday. "And we revealed the book to you in truth, confirming the book that came before it. To each one of you we have given a law and a path. And had God willed it, he would have made you one people. But in order to test you according to what he's given you, he has not done so. So compete with one another in good works. The return of all you is unto God. Then he will inform you about that in which you have disagreed." Eboo Patel, known by many of us as the founder and president of Interfaith America, previously known as the Interfaith Youth Corps, was a speaker at events on this campus in 2014. These events were co-sponsored by the USU Interfaith Initiative and Cash Community Connections. He told the story of Bob Roberts, the pastor of an evangelical church in North Texas, who led a missionary effort in Vietnam, focused on building schools and hospitals. He reflected on his childhood experiences and how his feelings had changed as a result of his interfaith service in Vietnam. Think about this, service and the important role that it plays in these relationships. It didn't take Bob long to discover the irony in his thinking. He'd been taught to hate the communists, and above all, Vietnamese communists, but had found himself overcoming his fear through personal relationships. He'd been taught to revile Catholics as followers of a false church, but had learned to admire the great personal risks they took for the opportunity to serve others. Perhaps the same thing would happen if he ever got the chance to work with Muslims. Bob was starting to see a new wisdom in his own faith, especially Jesus' command to love your enemy. The whole point is that when you love someone, you stop being their enemy. Maybe there's no such thing as enemies, just people who don't know one another and haven't yet met. In 1963, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King offered these insights. The good neighbor looks beyond the external accidents and discerns those inner qualities that make all men human and therefore brothers. We must learn to live together as brothers or perish as fools. We believe that before a community's residents can become truly neighbors, they need to know a little something about one another. Then we can act in a true spirit of common knowledge and respect, acknowledging similarities and differences in experience and perspective, and honoring both. Noted Christian writer C.S. Lewis, do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor, act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love him. Let me tell you something about a person in our community who has exemplified this. In fact, I was going to tell you about two, but Kathy and I visited before this, and I knew that she was going to talk about Rachel von Niederhausen. And so I'm going to tell you about one more. Nearly 2 years ago, a young woman in our community by the name of Nicole Bernard was participating in a voluntary street outreach experience where community members venture into the community, often during the nighttime or early morning hours, to search for persons who are homeless and unsheltered. A similar effort will be conducted by volunteers in this coming January in a nationwide exercise known as the Point-in-Time Count. The results of this count document the need in our communities for resources to support and care for individuals and families who are unsheltered. During her experience, Nicole encountered people spending the January night when temperatures dropped into the single digits in cars, some with broken windows and no heat, but huddled under blankets, in trailers and non-functioning RVs without water or heat, in storage units, and even in more exposed locations. These were people who may even have had jobs in the area but lacked sufficient resources to cover the high cost of permanent housing. Knowing that people often succumb to the harsh conditions of a Cache Valley winter, she determined to do something about the situation. She submitted a proposal to the Ivory Foundation for seed funding to establish a warming center that would provide temporary overnight shelter from the frigid temperatures during the coldest nights of the winter season. From among more than 100 different proposals, hers was selected. With that seed funding and other contributions, the William A. Bernard Warming Center, named for her grandfather who passed away while suffering from the circumstances related to homelessness, opened its doors on the evening of December 9th, 2022, just about 1 year ago. The Warming Center was located in Champ Hall of St. John's Episcopal Church, with the overwhelming support of the St. John's Parish and staffed with volunteers recruited and trained by a governing board. Overnight refuge from the elements was offered to all who found themselves without shelter. Guests were welcomed each evening at 7 o'clock and enjoyed the quiet, safety, and warmth, and a few snacks and fellowship until 8 the next morning. 7 nights a week. Over 1,100 nights of shelter were offered to more than 100 different guests during this past winter season, all with the gracious and selfless support of the St. John's community and our neighbors from throughout Cache Valley. The WAB Warming Center is set to open again on December 4th, next Monday, again at St. John's Episcopal Church. The center's new executive director, Lindsay Harrelson, recently invited the community to join the effort once again. She said, "We're dealing with the most vulnerable population and they need our help. They need a second, third, fourth, or more chances to get their life in order. We can't do it without volunteers. We rely on them to make this program successful." None of these efforts would be successful without the broad participation by people of many faiths, cultures, and life experience, guided by inspired leaders with necessary talents, skill, knowledge, and expertise. As we love our neighbors, regardless of obvious differences, and as we express our love through service and fellowship, we will come to know the benefits of a more peaceful and welcoming community. The Bible records a question posed to John the Baptist by his followers. "What shall we do then?" And his answer, "He that hath 2 coats, let him impart to him that hath none. And he that hath meat, let him do likewise." I think the same principle applies to other resources, including our time and energy. Just Serve, by the way, is a tool available in the community for connecting neighbors through service opportunities. This internet-based resource, justserve.org, connects needs in the community to those willing to fill those needs. 162 projects are currently listed in the Cache Valley area on the Just Serve website. Elder Quentin L. Cook, an apostle from my own religious tradition, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, recently stated, "Catholics, evangelicals, Jews, Muslims, Latter-day Saints, and other faiths must be a part of a coalition of faiths that succor and act as a sanctuary. The hard work of harmony is worth the effort it requires," according to Elder Gary E. Stevenson, another apostle. Our priority must be serving others and celebrating unity in diversity. Russell M. Nelson, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, expressed this goal: "Solutions will come as we open our hearts to those whose lives are different than our own, as we work to build bonds of genuine friendship, and as we see each other as brothers and sisters, we are all children of a loving God." The gospel of Jesus Christ calls on us to love people of all faiths, all races, cultures, creeds, nations, for the common goal, for the common good. All are alike unto God. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. West. So, okay, there's only one. I was going to say if there was 12 of these cups here, that's on me. Just pull this forward. All right, so we're here at the end. I want to welcome Andy N. Dallin to the stage from the Institute of Religion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to bring us home. So let's welcome him to the stage.
Wanted to put a little bit of shock value out there. Sometimes when we're considering our own religious traditions and judging those of others, we make assumptions, like the director of the Institute of Religion at Logan probably doesn't look like this. That is me, by the way, but the hair is fake. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're all comfortable and good with one another here as we move forward. But I am Andy Bryan, the director of the Logan Institute of Religion that works right here directly with Utah State University, and we are so grateful to be a part of this presentation. You're going to meet Dallin here in a little bit, but we're excited to be together with you today. I got to repent right off the bat. I'm going to quote BYU, so let's just get that out of the way, okay? But we found, as I looked at their statement on belonging, it's very similar to what we would align ourselves with as an Institute of Religion here on this campus. And I'm just going to emphasize a couple of things here, that we are united by our common primary identity as children of God. Dr. West just beautifully articulated that through the words of who we believe are our prophets and our leaders. We're grateful for that. I love this idea from the Book of Mormon that together we want to form a community where our hearts are knit together in love. And that's kind of the foundation of where I want to go with our presentation today. Just a couple more thoughts from our own faith and how we believe. From the church's own gospel topics page on diversity and unity, it says the gospel of Jesus Christ transcends every culture, race, nationality, and language. And regardless of ethnicity toward or outward appearance, all church members are united in the knowledge that they are children of a heavenly Father. They know he loves each of his children equally. From the Book of Mormon, he denieth, meaning God, denieth none that come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female, and all are alike unto God. And from the Article of Faith, number 11, written from the church's founder, Joseph Smith, we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may. Recently, I guess last year, Church President Russell M. Nelson was addressing members of the young adult community and was speaking about this idea of identity and labels, and mentioned that if he were to give a label for himself that transcends all other labels, it's first that he feels as a child of God, a son of God, which would transcend all of the things that he's had in his life, including medical doctor, surgeon, researcher, professor, lieutenant, captain, PhD, American, and so forth. There we go. He even said, some might label me as an old man, but I'm a lot younger than Adam was, and Noah too. Ageism, racism, and nationalism, sexism, and a host of other isms are universally limiting. Labels can lead to judging and animosity, any abuse or prejudice toward another because of nationality, race, sexual orientation, gender, educational degrees, culture, or other significant identifiers are offensive to our Maker. Now, I want to spend more time on narrative and less time on discourse, and so afford me a few minutes here to tell a little bit of a story. When I was, and some of this came to me last night, so I read a little bit from my phone. Just know that I can read too, and we're good, okay? There's something inherently primitive and vulnerable about a campfire. Satisfying our basic need for warmth and light, it naturally gathers all who desire to it, stripping us down to our basic needs and inviting a thoughtful meditation, sitting by a fire under the stars fosters big thoughts and big questions. And such was the case for me as a 17-year-old. Much like Maggie, who presented earlier, I grew up in a place where there's not a lot of Latter-day Saints. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and we were out camping in Missouri with some of my friends, and in that circle that night, comprised of, and I made a count in my head, 2 Catholics, a Methodist, a Baptist, a Unitarian, a Jew, a Jewish Catholic, if that's a thing, and 2 with no faith tradition or belief in God, and 1 member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The consuming wood and the distant stars beckon to conversation about our fates and our fates after death. We traversed what we thought we knew or hoped we could be in the life to come. When one of my Catholic friends was giving his 17-year-old version of a discourse on purgatory and what judgment meant like, all of a sudden this thought popped into my head, and I just said it out loud. I said, but did you know that there's actually 3 heavens? And they all looked over at me, and one of my friends go, "You Mormons are crazy, but tell us more." And I felt like that was the starting point of a fantastic conversation, interfaith with all these beliefs. I proceeded to butcher my own doctrine. I did not know it well. That was absolutely true. We laughed, we asked questions, we said a lot of stupid, ignorant teenager things, and then we went to bed. We all belonged. We all respected one another. We were all trying to understand a longing for personal meaning. And I miss those campfires. When I began my freshman year at the University of Missouri, my roommate was Hindu from India. And through him I met his Indian friends and family and other international students. I was introduced to Hinduism and Buddhism and prayers, meditation, and reflection. We spent long nights in our dorm room pondering the perplexities of eternity and existence. And though not a blaze of logs into the stars, I miss those proverbial campfires too. Later that school year, I had an interesting experience with a completely different set of friends. We were eating at a cafeteria, and all of a sudden, the topic of Mormonism came up. Now, if you don't know this, in the state of Missouri, as part of the elementary and high school curriculum for state history, you learned about my faith. And so everyone had an opinion, and the conversation became quite divisive, about and hostile towards my faith's beliefs and history and practices and leadership. And I wasn't mature or informed enough to know how to have that conversation at that time. But it no longer felt like a campfire. And I felt bad at moments in my own life where maybe I had made judgments that didn't feel like a campfire either to some of my friends of different faiths. It dawned on me for the first time in my life that I was raised in an environment and was attending a school where I was actually a minority. Not a minority, but there were so few that believed how I believed that I was blind to before, and I didn't realize that. I loved my friends, but this and other situations like it were among the galvanizing moments in my life that led me to a deep longing in me to better understand my own faith tradition and to ask the tough questions of myself and my faith, including its history, including its practices, some of which can be perceived as very unsavory, and to better unite myself with those who feel as I feel. Now, in our faith, in the Book of Mormon, we feel strongly about covenants. And the Book of Mormon describes covenants, at least the baptismal covenant, in this way, as one who wants to come into the fold of God, be called his people, and be willing to bear one another's burdens, that they may be light, willing to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. I probably should have had this picture of the University of Missouri, by the way. There you go. Beautiful quad there, by the way. And to stand as a witness of God at all times and in all things and in all places. So what did I do? I joined the ranks of missionary service. Now, it doesn't say much about diversity, but nothing says inclusivity by like 72,000 cookie-cutter missionaries who look like pen salesmen from 1962, right? And I joined and embraced and loved that environment and what it did for me. There was safety in a more walled environment, as it were, as opposed to the campfire. And I appreciated that too. Now, when I returned from my missionary service, I felt the need to do as many do and come to a gathering place of Latter-day Saints. So I transferred my educational experience to the Intermountain West and ended up at Utah State. And I'm here to declare to you, a lot of individuals who choose to attend Utah State University do so, believe it or not, because of their faith. That this is a place of community for them where it may not be in other places. And though I felt a strength and safety being around my own religious community, if there is one thing I learned from my transition back from missionary life to student life, it was this. Though safe for being in the believing majority, religious homogeneity doesn't equate to unity, especially in the knitting of hearts. We all need each other, all of each other. I longed for campfires of diverse, inclusive conversation. And so I ended up making new friends and having new experiences, and I became a religious educator employed by the church. Recently, we've realized, as Patrick Mason brought up yesterday, that there is a changing view from this upcoming generation that we're teaching here at Utah State and in other universities. Religiosity has taken a different turn, and views of inclusivity have also taken different turns. We did an internal study within the church a few years ago, 2 massive studies actually, that talked about why do people not to participate or not participate in Institute. And we found 4 interesting findings that were fascinating to me. Number 1 here, they wanted to feel God's love and regularly connect with Him on a personal level. But there was this strong sense of belonging that they felt was lacking in what we were offering. They wanted a positive environment where everyone feels welcome, a place to invite friends of all backgrounds, and a feeling of connection to a greater cause. They also wanted a place to be able to discuss tough issues, tough social issues, tough doctrinal issues, where we could have conversations that felt less like walls in a room and more like campfires under the stars. So what have we done? We've made some adjustments, and we've changed our pedagogical approach to be more conversational with students, be more inviting of those of any faith, and to have class offerings. Sorry, I should have this picture. This is our building, by the way. We're in a bit of a diasporic moment here. We've been scattered among campus and everywhere else, and we appreciate having the interaction at Utah State. Thank you, Utah State, for being so inviting as we're releasing some space here. But what we've done here is we serve thousands of students on campus, as Bonnie mentioned earlier. And we have a ton of classes that we offer, but we're expanding what we've moved on from our more dogmatic approach. Women in the Scriptures, LGBTQ classes, race and priesthood issues, student-led conversations on faith, world religions, that have helped to incorporate a more inclusive offering here. But it's not just about classes. And we're going to invite Dallin Higgins here, who is our student council president, to take a few minutes and talk about some other ways that we are inclusive.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am so grateful to be here. Like he said, my name is Dallin Higgins, and I'm the president of the Latter-day Saints Student Association and the Institute Council here. And he just set me up so well talking about what I want to talk about. Because for me, there's always been this air of it being genuine, and I want to talk from the student's perspective. I hope you just see me as a student at Utah State who has been touched and affected by the Institute of Religion, and what my story is, and stories of my friends. That's what I want to share today, because as he said, it is more than just classes. I served as a missionary. I served in Tucson, Arizona. I served during COVID time, so I started there, and I spent about a year there during that time, and then I went to Mozambique in southeastern Africa. But here, when I served at the University of Arizona, it changed my life. They have an Institute of Religion very similar to ours here, the exact same ideas of classes and activities and a gathering place. And as I was there, I learned that the Institute of Religion can be so much more than just a class. And so that's what I want to talk about today. This is a group of my friends, and they are so important to me. This is my missionary companion at the time. His name's Isaac. And then my friend Ryan, Colby, Elizabeth, Lauren, and Laura. I could spend 10 minutes on all of them and how the Institute of Religion affected their life, but I want to just focus for a couple of minutes on my friend Elizabeth. She's the third one from the left. When I met her, she was a freshman starting her experience at the University of Arizona. She grew up in the Catholic faith and was very devoted to the Catholic faith, and she loved Jesus Christ and his teachings. And as I got to know her, she opened up to me about how she was depressed. She was completely depressed, and I share this with her permission. But she had gone through suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and it broke my heart. And I felt like I couldn't do anything because I wanted to do more, but I couldn't. And I watched as the Institute of Religion provided a place to foster friendship, to foster a place where she didn't have to worry about the future, she didn't have to worry about her career, but she could just be around the campfire, as Brother Brian stated, and feel accepted. And to me, that opened my eyes. I was a young missionary, and I didn't really understand until that moment, but through that semester, I watched as Elizabeth was changed, and she found hope. The Institute of Religion became a bubble of hope that she could enter into and understand who she is as a daughter of God, as a person in society that could contribute and be loved. And to this day, she is doing amazing. She is so happy and has a purpose. And I kind of felt like I was just watching this like a movie. I realized, wow, the Institute of Religion and these gathering places, these campfires can actually heal us. And there's nothing that's more important than that, right? I mean, a young girl who wanted to take her own life, flipped around by this place of belonging. And in that moment, I realized the power that comes from these campfire settings where we can share and be ourselves. And that can come in a variety of different ways, right? But I wanted to talk about a couple of them. The Institute, I got to point this way. The Institute also gives a chance to serve. These are my friends who are on what we call the Institute Student Council this year. And I can say, because I work with them a lot, that we all come from very different backgrounds and have lots of different opinions. And that's amazing because it gives us a chance to learn from each other and to figure out the best ways to serve the people here on Utah State campus. And this group of people right here actually just represent a larger group of people we call the Institute committees. And so every 2 or 3 of them are in charge of a different committee that's in charge of food or service or social media or things like that. A group of about 100 to 150 people who all just want to serve. And I've learned something from this as well. When we have the chance to serve, it actually creates this never-ending cycle that I've found. And it actually makes me laugh because I've seen people who want to help us take down chairs and things like that after an activity who aren't even involved in the Institute. And I think, why do they want to do that? I wouldn't want to take my time to help clean up a dinner or something like that. But what I've seen is when we serve others, we get a feeling that makes us feel loved. We feel the love of God. We feel a positive energy. The people who are being served feel that same love of God and positive energy. And then those people want to serve. And I've seen a community that comes together from serving each other, that bounces off each other, one after the other. And I think that's something to be looked at as a chain reaction of service. As Jesus said in the Bible, by this shall men know ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. And I kind of look at that as that bouncing effect of one to another, to another, to another, in this web of service. And I've seen that be so cool to me, that even just this year, through the Institute Council, and anyone can join. And that's what's so cool is anyone can join and serve at any time. I want to finish with my own personal anecdote. I also served in Mozambique on my mission and lived there for a year, and then I returned back this past summer. And so Africa has a special place in my heart, and the people there have a special way of looking at life that I just feel like any time I'm talking to anyone, I have to share it. And I remember a time that I was serving as a missionary, and we were with this family, and it goes right back to Brother Brian's campfire example, but we were sitting, and oftentimes we would draw in the dirt. They just love it. They love playing with the dirt, and we would draw out, we were teaching about the plan of salvation, which is our faith's view on God's plan for us, and this plan of happiness, this way to find happiness. And as we were teaching about this and having this discussion, I looked up at the sky, and I've never felt it this strong again in my life. I looked up at the sky, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Just this feeling of pure gratitude. I said, thank you, God, for allowing me to be with this culture that's different from mine and discuss things that enlighten both of our spirits. And as I did that, I came to another realization that belonging is when we include our diversity, when we talk about what we believe, and we find truth in our combination of belonging. And that is what the Institute of Religion is for me. It's a gathering place. These classes on campus, these activities, they're a place for us to come together, sit around the campfire, as Brother Brian stated, and learn from each other. And I'm so grateful for that. I think I'm grateful that you all are here, because this is its own campfire. And as we all go out into the world and share this with other people, we can continue to foster that relationship. And I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
I don't know if this is working or if this is better. Is this working still? I have 30 seconds to wrap this up. You click that one more time. So we know on campus and in this community there are Hindus and Buddhists and Catholics and name it, and agnostics, and those who are even disenfranchised members of our own faith tradition, Dallin and I. But first of all, if you are on campus and you feel like you are that small number who feels a little ostracized by this great majority, I am sorry if we've ever done anything to hurt. But second, may we extend a hand of fellowship and invite you to the campfire and come have conversations. We love you. I see you first as children of God, my own brothers and sisters. And again, thank you for being here today, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll just get a few words, because I know I can't overdo the fire there. That's good. So just a couple departing thoughts. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming out, and shout out to everyone on Zoom, my family members and others, neighbors. But again, the biggest takeaway is this. So as we increase self-knowledge, it also attunes. This comes from Adriana Kazar from the University of Southern Cal. Self-knowledge also attunes us to our potential for biases and other cognitive blinders, as well as an area in which we have assets and resources. we may draw upon to expand opportunities where it is inequitably distributed. Thus, higher education, the community practice informed by social justice, demands self-reflection. And I know I've said these questions throughout the day. I think the big thing is, as you continue, hopefully you saw on the first day, more from a scholarly perspective as they built foundations on just sort of the range of diversity within different religious traditions. And then today you kind of heard the scholarly practitioners talk about, hey, this is how it kind of looks for us. This is how we go about. This is how religion has shaped our identities, or how we look at it in policy or in equity. So continuing to think of that, whether you're religious or not, what is shaping your views of social justice and equity? And then finally, how does that identity shape your experience and journey as an administrator, as student, faculty, staff, or a community member? And I think what you can see as we continue to do that, this can become our asset and a strength here at Utah State University, continuing to take things to the next level and to build on all the great things that you all are doing. So with that, I want to end. See you all after lunch. Go Aggies. Thank you so much, y'all.